Okay, recording's starting.
Yeah, but faces can be concocted by AI. Anyway,
Oh, yeah, you can change my face.
so the disciplinarian who's going to keep the meeting to order is Victor. However, before the main event, which is my highly insightful and thought-provoking presentation, Victor is going to report on an event of ideological significance that happened a week ago.
Okay, thank you. The event that I was able to attend is, it was called Midwestuary. So it's a portmanteau of Midwest and estuary. And it was basically a gathering of roughly 350-ish people from a part of the internet that has sort of called itself This Little Corner, TLC. And there are a number of figures who are sort of prominent in it, and arguably the one most associated with TLC is a Christian Reformed pastor named Paul Vanderklay. He's based out of California at, I believe, the church is called Living Stones. He's very prolific on his YouTube channel, has some pretty interesting stuff. His main focus for a good long while was like Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson was sort of like the primordial ooze that gave rise to This Little Corner. Okay. So people who ended up getting fascinated by Jordan Peterson's lectures, or maybe his Genesis lectures, eventually the algorithm served up Paul Vanderklay, and people got into Paul Vanderklay in a big way. Some of the other, I don't know if they're necessarily a part of TLC, but they are central figures of following, or admiration might be too strong, but people who follow, there's some figures like, of course, Jordan Peterson. There's this Eastern Orthodox icon carver named Jonathan Pajot. There is a cognitive psychologist, maybe, I think, by the name of John Vervaeke. And so, Pajot, Vervaeke, and, in the early days, Peterson, there were a lot of people who were fascinated by all that, and they would watch all these videos and consume all this content, and especially with Paul Vanderklay, that they sort of became like a community. And one of the things that Paul Vanderklay did, in the early years, is he would have what he called randos on his channel. So people who just wanted to talk to him and say things, and they sort of became little micro celebrities on their own. But the estuary part of Midwestuary is a term that I don't know who originated it to use it this way. It could have been Paul Vanderklay. But the idea is that there are these estuary groups. I happen to be someone who participates in the Chicagoland Bridges of Meaning group, which is an estuary group that's inspired by this Paul Vanderklay guy. And basically all estuary is it's if you're familiar with the term, it literally means where the river, freshwater from like a river meets the ocean. So where the salt water meets, the freshwater. Okay. And I think that's supposed to be like a metaphor for, if I'm not mistaken, it's where like it's not church, because these are mostly religious people. Obviously, Paul Vanderklay being a pastor at Living Stones in California. That it's sort of not church, but it's not exactly secular either, because there's, just almost everybody is going to be Christian. And it's basically you get together, you talk about important things or things that might be on your mind. It can be politics, it can be religion, it can be philosophy, it can be personal circumstances that somebody's dealing with. That doesn't happen too often in our group. Maybe it happens in some of the other groups. But there's an actual estuary protocol. And basically what it is people will, introduce themselves. You don't really have to do that if it's the same people coming every time. But when there's new people, you do everybody introduces themselves, spends like a minute or two, hi, my name is, I come from whatever, my background is this, I'm interested in this, and, you know, I discovered Jordan Peterson, blah, 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 or I don't like Jordan Peterson, whatever it happens to be. And then you move around, and then the next round is somebody proposes a topic, and then, you know, each person, you know, they might want to propose their own topic, they might want to just say, yeah, I like that person's topic. And then the third round is you point to, and you can't point to yourself, you point to the person whose topic you're most interested in, and then you sort of go from there. We don't really follow that protocol as much in our Chicagoland Bridges of Meaning group, but, you know, occasionally we do when there's new people. And this has been, you know, one of the things in this TLC space, which is something that's sort of a specialty of John Vervaeke, is what has been called the meaning crisis. John Vervaeke has actually written a book on the topic, and it says part 1, so presumably there's going to be subsequent volumes that will be released. I don't know when, but he co-wrote a book about the awakening from the meaning crisis, and it's him and I had it on the tip of my tongue. Mas Pietro is the last name, I think, for the author, the co-author. And in fact, John Vervaeke, I haven't watched. I don't really consume that much of the TLC content. You know, the Paul Vanderklay, the Vervaeke, the Peugeot. I just don't. By the way, if you're not familiar with Vervaeke or Peugeot, they're prominent enough that I think they've both been on Jordan Peterson's podcast, you know, more than once. So, and Peterson is one of the, you know, upper level. You know, you're in the Rogan League at that point, right? Or if not, you're just under Rogan League. Vervaeke is primarily known for his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis YouTube video series, which I believe is 50 videos long, which is a lot. And what the book is supposed to be is it's supposed to be a distillation of this meaning crisis stuff. One of the things that happened, the talks at the Midwestuary Conference, and so Midwestuary, it's like, it was both a bunch of keynotes, and it was a bunch of breakout little estuary groups of like roughly 10 people each. And for many of the people there, that was their favorite part, is having these intimate discussions, right? That the keynotes were fine, but they loved the estuary part, and they wanted even more of it. The speakers ended up being Jonathan Peugeot, John Vervaeke, Rod Dreher, who is a conservative writer. I don't follow him too much, but the one guy I do follow, Vox Day, has taken numerous shots at Rod Dreher over the years for being sort of like a cuck-servative. But regardless of any of that, Rod Dreher was probably the most prominent guy there, I would say. So Rod Dreher, Jonathan Peugeot, John Vervaeke, Elizabeth Oldfield, who was sort of like the odd man out, but, you know, they sort of wanted to mix it up a little bit because she's not part of TLC. She tends to have political and cultural views that are a lot at odds. I'll give you an example. She thinks that climate alarmism is a legitimate thing to worry about. She thinks that there are climate refugees, and they're already, you know, migrating to places because of climate impact. She definitely has some feminist leanings, and it would be an interesting thought experiment to find out if she had to choose between her Christianity and her feminism, which would she choose? That's not very clear to me. And her podcast is called The Sacred. Her Substack is, I forget what it's called, but she has a book called Fully Alive, and it's, I don't know, to me, it just wouldn't resonate with me. It's a lot of this touchy-feely stuff, but she gave a keynote. It was okay. Vervaeke's keynote was awesome. It was just really good. If you asked me to summarize it, I kind of can't. I'd have to like think about it and review the video when that gets published. But the thing that sort of was the thing that really came out of Vervaeke talking was when he was on a panel the following day, and he basically said nobody should be using LLMs. Large language models, you know, like the ChatGPT type of things and all that stuff. They're just too dangerous. Don't do it. And one of the things that he mentioned in his talk was, oh, hey, I'm getting roughly at least once a day, I'm getting somebody who emails me that they are absolutely convinced that their chat AI, whatever, has achieved sentience, not only sentience, but enlightenment, and, is desperate for me to, like, validate that, corroborate that, look into that or something. And they're like, there are other people who will use these these LLM chat things, because they might be lonely, and they might use it because it can simulate interaction and intimacy. But that has led to people developing psychoses as a result of that. I don't know exactly how that works, but it happens enough that it's just, and he says, just don't do it, right? And the example he gives, the sort of broader level example that he gave was, and you talk, just broader technological stuff, like, putting kids in front of screens. You look at any of these Silicon Valley types, these CEOs and stuff like that. They keep most of this technology away from their kids because they know. So
The AI, the library.
Social media too.
So, like screens in general, but like social media, especially social media, like it's open now. It's common knowledge, or at least open knowledge, that like they hired PhD psychologists at, like, let's say Facebook, precisely in order to figure out how to optimize their software, their algorithms to trigger an addictive response. Like they hired people to make it literally addictive. It wasn't just something that happened to be addictive. They engineered it that way. Right.
That really surprised me.
So Vervaeke, his big thing, which was kind of a surprise to Vanderklay, was that he just came out as anti-LLM, and Pajot on that panel was like, well, we kind of have to see, maybe we can use it sometimes. We kind of have to know how it works and all this kind of stuff. And, the obvious comparison is, well, yeah, but like maybe you can study how cocaine works, but that doesn't mean anybody should take cocaine ever, right? Or heroin ever, or, ecstasy ever, right? You don't have to use something in order to know how it works necessarily if the, cost is far outweighs the benefit, kind of thing, which in the case of drugs, it does, and in the case of LLMs for Vervaeke, it absolutely does. So the one of the insights that I think was interesting, that might be, I think it was Vervaeke who proposed the idea that a precursor to the meaning crisis, and this is the first I've heard it, but not that I've been following it that long, that a precursor to the meaning crisis is a trust crisis, right? Meaning, people get meaning from relationships, from forming communities and relationships, and that's like, you need that. You can't not have that. If you don't have that, that's probably where a lot of this meaning crisis is coming from, is people are not forming relationships and communities that nourish them, right? But what is a necessary ingredient for being able to do that? How do you make friends? Who are friends? Friends are people you trust. If there is a trust crisis, you're going to necessarily have a meaning crisis. And that was an idea that he put out there that I thought was like, ooh, that's interesting. I don't know how right that is, but it seems compelling enough to look into, that it could very well be right. It seems very plausible to me, right? Aside from that, I did some helping out at the conference. I tried to be as helpful as I could, because they were doing a good job. The leader of our estuary group, we don't call ourselves an estuary group, it's just our Chicagoland meetup group. His name is Sam Tiedemann. He's really cool. He's very smart. I believe he's Ivy League educated. He does work for the evil Google Corporation, and I give him shit about
Which
that.
corporation?
Google.
Alphabet.
He's a data scientist, Alphabet, but literally he does work for Google, right? Like the actual Google company that's under Alphabet. And I give him shit for it every now and then, just to remind him, like, I'm better than you because I don't work for Google, even though he's probably almost certainly smarter than me and more knowledgeable than me on certain things. They put together an excellent conference. People have been giving them. Oh, my favorite. Let me back up. My favorite moment of the entire conference was on the second day, when it was panels and other miscellaneous things. And Sam, the leader of our group and arguably the chief organizer of the conference, he served as a moderator on a small panel of just two people, and it was Rod Dreher and it was Elizabeth Oldfield. And, you know, for the tagline of the conference was Fellowship of the Spirit. So it was a lot of like, you know, head in the clouds kind of, not in a pejorative way, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but, you know, kind of like very high level in the sense of just kind of nebulous, amorphous, abstract, you know, things like meaning and spirituality and stuff like this. The tagline of the conference was called Fellowship of the Spirit, right? But what Sam did, like, and I said to him, this was a master stroke, I loved it. What Sam did is he posed the question to Elizabeth Oldfield and Rod Dreher, you know. So, you know, we're Christians, and you know, the Bible does have some things to say about how we're supposed to love our enemies and embrace the stranger, blah, 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 that kind of thing. But, you know, we are experiencing a migration crisis. I'm paraphrasing. You know, something along the lines of, we are experiencing a migration crisis, and, you know, different countries are really, you know, experiencing some hardship as a result of mass migration, and there's all kinds of cultural tensions, and maybe there's even talk of civil war, you know, all this kind of stuff. How should we as Christians, you know, deal with, you know, migration? How do we, you know, approach that issue? How do we decide that issue?
No, I'll sit here.
How do we decide that issue? How do we approach?
Who's on the couch here?
Corinna.
Gotcha.
How do we decide that issue? How do we approach that issue? So it wasn't so much, the question wasn't so much about like, what's the right policy on immigration? You can go to a political meetup and discuss it there. But it was specifically, how are Christians supposed to think about and approach the immigration issue, mass migration issue, you know? And when he asked that question, and he did two things too. He said, like, you know, there's the distinction between the small scale personal and the large scale political, right? So, in other words, you know, at this level it's people, and at this level it's systems. Guess what? That skews male and female. Women are interested in people, and men are interested in things, and a system is a kind of thing. So men are interested in systems more so than people, or at least more so than women are interested in systems. And then there's also the left-right, you know, spectrum of, you know, where on the political spectrum you are. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff. So he brought it to something concrete, and I thought, oh my God, not only is that really good, but I know that there's going to be friction up there, and there was. I was tapping my fingers like this, and I was like, yes, let the hate flow. There was no hate. I was just, you know, doing the evil Emperor Palpatine thing, right? And so Rod Dreher went first, and he was talking about some of the horrific things that are happening as a result of mass migration. Like in the UK, there are thousands of girls who are being raped because by migrants, right? So he goes through some of these things. Rod Dreher lives in Budapest, Hungary. Guess what Hungary has? A very restrictive immigration policy. It's not an accident he lives in Hungary, right? So he, right, and he talks about some woman who used to live like in one of these mass migration flooded places and decided she had to get out of there, and she also moved to Budapest or something like that. So he told a story to make it personal, you know, which is more persuasively effective. So he's saying all these things, and they are either right-coded or nationalist-coded or male-coded even at a certain level. And I'm looking at Elizabeth, and she's sitting there, and you could be autistic and you could still get the body language off of her. She was tensed up, her head was crooked, her eyes were almost popping out of her head. She had to blink relatively frequently to keep them from popping out of her head, and I could just see it. When he was done saying the thing, and it's not like he went on and on and on, but when he was done saying the things that he was saying, she had to take a moment, and compose herself. She ended up saying a prayer. Literally, she said a prayer out loud to give her the strength to, you know, whatever it was, to treat, you know, the differing perspectives with the humanness it deserves, or whatever kind of fluffy language, to whatever kind of fluffy language it was. And then...
What's her religious persuasion?
She claims that she's Christian, and indeed...
Well, I know they're both Christian, but denomination, I mean... Because I know Dreher is like an Orthodox convert.
Yeah, he used to be Catholic. Yeah. I don't know.
Greek Orthodox?
Yeah, I don't know if it's Greek Orthodox,
I don't know if it's Greek, but it's Orthodox.
It's Christian Orthodox, whatever.
I mean, it's Catholic without the Pope. and with icons, more or less.
Something like that.
Russian,
They're yeah.
Ukrainian, Greek.
Each nationality has their own.
So I don't know what
Serbian.
specific denomination it is. I didn't catch that. I don't know if she said it and I missed it, or she never said it. But yeah, I'm not familiar. I just know she's a Christian. She says she's a Christian, and she says she lives in a Christian community or somewhere around London or something. She said a prayer, and her response. Her response was consistent with what I would have expected from what I had gathered from her ahead of time by looking at her Substack, looking at her podcast, and stuff like that. It was very emotional. She went into, about we need to not demonize brown people, and I'm roughly paraphrasing. I didn't bother to try to retain too much of it because there wasn't that much of substance to retain. I don't mean any disrespect, it just is what it is. And it was such a productive thing, but one of the things that she remarked after the fact, towards the end of that panel, was, that she really she was surprised somewhat that, she was still treated with respect by the end of it, like maybe, for example, if she was in some political, gathering, that people would boo and heckle her or something, and she didn't encounter that. And part of that, I believe, is the estuary protocol, where, yeah, you do all these things, but it is a place where you can talk about, it's supposed to be a place where you can talk about difficult things, you treat each other with respect, you do all this kind of stuff, and so, these people did not react the way she was perhaps wary that they would. There was also this guy, Cale Zeldin, there, who also has a Substack. He does a YouTube channel. He didn't really keynote, but he kind of more moderated most of the time. His Substack is actually reasonably good, and then I'll sort of end it here unless anybody has any questions. His Substack is actually really good. It's called The Underneath, and one of the ones that I read was from 2 years ago when he read something by, I've heard of this Twitter person before, called Lomez, where the E is actually the character number 3. But it's Lomez, and Lomez wrote this thing called The Longhouse. And it's been a while since I read it, and I only read the sort of reaction summary on Cale's Substack just the other day. But the Longhouse is basically the metaphor or the concept for our overly, oppressively, suffocatingly feminized cultural norms that have just strangled everything, right? If you get called into HR because Sally thought that the way you talked to her was offensive, you're the Longhouse, it's generally if you're a man and you want to, I'm stretching a little bit. You know what, let me just back up. The Longhouse, look it up. It's roughly, again, like I said, generally oppressive, feminine cultural forces that have kind of overtaken everything, right? The COVID response is an example of that because it was a hyper focus on safetyism. Everybody needs to be locked in their homes. Everybody's got to get, quintuple boosted with the jab that's, unproven and all this kind of stuff. Everybody, safety, 6 feet apart, we're all scared and we got to do safety. Look for The Longhouse by Lomez. It's actually really good from what I recall from having read it a long time ago. But that gives you a little thing about that Midwestuary conference, the TLC, some of the players and figures in it, and that's pretty much all I got. You think that's good enough?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Then I'm done.
More than enough.
Okay. All right. I know what that means. Too much. All right.
I'm going to hold up a number of books during my presentation, so I should get those books ready.
I had a question, Vic.
Yeah.
So, in regard to trust and meaning topic, did anybody present any solutions to get meaning back when you're dealing with trust issues?
I don't recall I'm not saying there weren't any, but I'm not recalling at the moment if anybody had any specific things about how to address the trust crisis, right? Or, you know, the lack of trust, or how hard it is to, you know, have trust or something. I don't recall that, because my impression is that this idea is relatively recent. You know, I don't recall ever hearing the trust crisis in conjunction with the meaning crisis. I've only ever heard about the meaning crisis, so this might have been, I think this is something that Vervaeke came up with fairly recently. I could be wrong about that, but I think so. So no, I don't recall if there was anything specific. If I had to take a guess, you know, some of these estuary groups is probably, you know, something that they would say, like, oh yeah, you know, if you meet these like-minded people, they're into the same things, you know, like, you know, there's probably some kind of default filtering mechanism where, you know, you're probably going to filter for people where trust is easier to do. I don't know. That would just be a guess.
The format is very interesting. And the pastor you mentioned,
Paul Vanderklay.
I have seen his videos before.
Okay.
I've seen I don't know if I've seen sermons. I don't know if he's done more,
Some of what he does is like a rough draft of a sermon as a video on YouTube. He sort of works things out.
I've seen videos of him like preaching, so I
Yeah,
assume
okay.
those are the. So, I mean, they're interesting from a, you know, preacher doing a Sunday service perspective. But that's the extent that I am aware of. But the format of the meetups sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it's not bad. I go there mostly because it's like, hey, you can talk about cool stuff that you're not going to get very often in just, you know, random everyday stuff, you know, so.
What was the venue?
The venue for the conference, or the meetup?
Conference.
The conference was Elmhurst Christian Reformed Church, which is roughly, I should turn that down, which is very close to, do you know where Drury Lane is in Oak Brook? It's very close to that. Like, if you see that big tower there, it's like kind of across the highway from that. Like, you know, if you could walk there, it would only be a few minutes, but you kind of have to drive around a little bit to go from the hotel that they were staying at, which is right there by that tower, and the church.
So this is basically a group for Christians? Is it mostly
No,
exclusively for Christians, or?
It's because Paul Vanderklay I think it was Paul Vanderklay who had this estuary concept, and, you know, people who, you know, it's only natural that the people who are going to be doing this are going to be Christian, but it's not like an overtly Christian group. Like, there's a Buddhist in my group, and nobody cares, you know. Mm-hmm. It's not an overtly religious thing. They will typically talk about stuff that's in the news, or the, you know, what's the latest from Paul Vanderklay or Vervaeke or whatever, or, you know, just a general topic that they're concerned about that, you know, maybe they saw on Twitter. It doesn't have to, it's not overtly religious, but it has sort of like religious roots in that, you know, it was sort of like a momentum outgrowth from stuff Paul Vanderklay was doing. So, yep. But I relinquish the speaker's mic to David for his much more important talk that will incorporate the LNT report.
Okay, well, thanks. So, what I want to talk about is loosely based on chapter 13 in my latest collection of literary gems, The Conquistador with his pants down. And it's about Lysenkoism and how it has emerged repeatedly in the democratic West. Now, Lysenko is usually pronounced by people in the English-speaking world as Lysenko, but it should be pronounced Lysenko. I've listened to Russian-speaking people and Ukrainian-speaking people, and that's how they pronounce it, roughly speaking. I'm not fluent in those languages, but that's a better approximation. So Lysenko was someone who rose to prominence in the early 30s in the Soviet Union. And by 1935, he had won the approval of Comrade Stalin, and that meant that he could do no wrong, and he was given total control over Soviet agriculture. When I say that, I don't mean that he went out and drove a tractor or anything like that. I just mean that the ideology of Soviet agriculture had to conform completely to the ideas of Lysenko. But now, before I say a bit more about him, I've been struck over the last couple of years by the fact that young people, by which I mean people under the age of 60, are totally unaware
60?
of certain things about the Soviet Union and the communist movement that older people, when they were younger, were fully aware of, especially if they showed an interest. So I'm going to say a little bit about what led to the Soviet Union and the communist movement, just very quickly. When Karl Marx died in 1883, if you'd been watching the situation closely and you were asked what to make of these people who called themselves Marxists, actually, they usually didn't at that point, because Marx had famously said, "Je ne suis pas Marxiste." He was multilingual, so he said that in French. So I'm not a Marxist. But eventually they got used to calling themselves Marxists. But Marxists in 1883, you would have said, were a very tiny handful of people scattered all over Europe who had some wacky ideas, and it didn't seem as though they were going anywhere. That's what you would have said. So if you are espousing some minority ideological position and you're tempted to lose heart, don't. Because it may be that in a few years your movement will take over the world, or at least a big portion of the world. So what happened then between 1883 and World War I was that Marxism became a very important part of social, political, cultural life in Europe. And part of the reason that the main part of the reason why that happened was because in many parts of Europe, the franchise was being widened. So working class people were getting the vote in Germany and other countries in Europe. And Marxism, which makes a point of thinking of itself as representing the working class, evangelized sections of the working class so that they became socialists politically. So you had the growth of socialist parties, and these socialist parties, they were called socialist or social democratic. Those two terms were used interchangeably all the time. The biggest of them was the German Social Democratic Party. And when it was legalized in, I guess, about 1910, 1912, it was the biggest political party in Germany. It wasn't a majority, because there were many political parties in Germany, but it was the biggest political party in Germany. And these socialist parties, they had mostly been founded by non-Marxists, and then the intellectuals in these parties had been converted to Marxism from these non-Marxist socialist things. So in Germany, the dominant figure in the socialist movement originally was a man called Ferdinand Lassalle. And his followers gradually gave way. He was very different to Marx in all kinds of ways. But his ideas were replaced by Marxist ideas, so that well before the First World War, the leading intellectuals in the German Social Democratic Party, which was a huge party, were all Marxist. And in fact, one of them, Johann Kautsky, was often referred to by detractors as the Pope of Marxism, which is not an understatement. Which is not an overstatement. And so, because he was the most influential Marxist theoretician in the world before the First World War. So anyway, I mean, this is important because one of the things you have to understand is that Marxists were very different to the people who later became known as communists. Very different. These Marxists were all religiously democratic, very much in favour of free speech, and all kinds of democratic rights. And they formed the social democratic parties of Western Europe and parts of Central and Eastern Europe. So that was the main legacy of Marx politically. However, something happened in Russia which was a bit different. So in Russia, there was a political party which originally, I think it was founded in the 1890s, and it was called the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party. And it was just like, apparently, just like all these other socialist parties or social democratic parties. But it had a split, and the split became really striking and animated in 1912. And so it split into two groups. One group on its letterhead said, the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, brackets, Mensheviks. When I say brackets, I'm English, so we call parentheses brackets. Parentheses, Mensheviks. And the other group called itself the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, parentheses, Bolsheviks. So Bolsheviks is derived from the Russian word for more, and Mensheviks for less. But so it meant majority and minority. But actually, by this time, the Mensheviks were much bigger than the Bolsheviks. However, what eventually happened was the Bolsheviks became more and more, of course, they couldn't be a fully democratic party because they were illegal in Russia, because there was no political democracy in Russia. But what happened was eventually the Bolsheviks were the people who rejected certain Marxist principles, like don't support coups and insurrections, and don't try and make a revolution in a backward peasant country. Those were basic principles of Marxism. So the Bolsheviks threw those over.
Defining characteristics.
And they took power in Russia in the October Revolution, which was actually in November. You can ask me later why. So they became quite intolerant, and they persecuted people who didn't agree with them, including the surviving Mensheviks. So at first they thought they were spearheading a world revolution, but after a few years they realized the world revolution was not coming. And so they had to decide what to do. And since they'd killed a lot of people, committed a lot of atrocities, they didn't feel like saying, oh, we made a mistake. We were premature. That wasn't in their nature. What they did was they hunkered down, and in 1918 they changed their name from Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, parenthesis, Bolsheviks, to the Russian Communist Party. And the following year, 1919, they set up an international. So the international means an international socialist movement of some kind. There was what was called the Second International, which was all the social democratic parties had an international. They called themselves International Working Men's Association, but they were an international federation of national socialist parties. So the communists, as they were now called, set up an international in 1919. Those who are interested in coincidences might note that this was almost exactly the same time that the fascist movement was founded in Milan by Mussolini and several other former Marxists. However, we'll leave that. So they set up an international. What this meant was, in every country in the world, there was to be a communist party. And it would call itself the Communist Party of the United States of America, the Communist Party of Great Britain, the Communist Party of France, etc. And they had to subscribe to a number of principles. But in fact, there was only one principle. You do what Moscow tells you to do. That was the principle. So basically all these communist parties, as they called themselves, were ruled from an office in Moscow. In the very early years, it had some kind of autonomy and wasn't precisely the same as the government. But when Dimitrov became the head, he then at that point, it was just Joseph Stalin telling all these communist parties what to do. So
at this point, is China communist?
Well, China only became communist in 1949, which is a lot later.
China's not in the picture yet.
That was a lot later.
Okay.
But there was a communist party in China, and they had to parrot everything that they were told by Moscow, just like all other communist parties.
But you don't know if Mao was involved yet. No. It's okay.
I'm not sure. I think that's a close question.
1927.
I'd have to think about it. Mao was involved in the Chinese Communist Party very early on, but I'm not sure whether he was involved in 1919. He might have been too young. But anyway, so one thing you have to understand is that all these communist parties, like the Communist Party of the United States of America, the Communist Party of Great Britain, it wasn't just that they said, rah, 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 Soviet Union. They had to accept the entire ideology, and they had to accept the party line as it was laid down in Moscow. And so when, in 1935, the party line became genetics is a bourgeois pseudoscience, and only the theories of Lysenko, which are actually in large measure based on the theories of an earlier Russian biologist called Michurin. You had to take the view that genetics was all bunk, that it was a pseudoscience, that it was bourgeois, that it was imperialist, and that you would do nothing to promote it, and you had to oppose it. So, I mean,
how
just
do you enforce such compliance?
They could enforce it because they were funding these communist parties. Moscow was sending money. Oh, precious.
There's also espionage and internal subversion.
Yeah.
Well, external.
You couldn't survive as the leader of a well-funded communist party if you went against Moscow. And now in Great Britain, the two leaders the Communist Party. There was a worker leader and an intellectual leader. The worker's name was Harry Pollitt. The intellectual leader was what was his name? Palmer Dutt. He was half Swedish and half Indian. So Palmer is a Swedish name and Dutt is an Indian name. And he was the intellectual leader, and actually he was more than the intellectual leader of the Communist Party of Great Britain. He was a huge figure in the Communist International. He was a world figure within the communist movement. Now in the United States it was a bit different. So yes, so Dutt and Pollitt became entrenched as the leaders very early on, and they always did exactly what Moscow told them to do, and so everything was fine. Now in the United States it was very different. There was a guy called J. Lovestone, and he was the leader, but he had had the misfortune, or I think actually probably the good fortune, to have backed Bukharin in the struggle with Stalin. There was a period where Stalin was struggling within the Communist Party in Russia, and eventually he got rid of his enemies. He had them condemned to death and executed. And Bukharin had been a very prominent communist in the revolution. Trotsky, of course, had been as well, but Trotsky was exiled, and then he went to live in Mexico City, and Stalin sent an assassin, and he was killed by Stalin's assassin in Mexico City. So, the Russian Communist Party made it inevitable that Lovestone was got out, and so then you had William Z. Foster, who became leader of, or one of the leaders of the Communist Party of the United States. This had to be done very delicately because the great majority of the members of the Communist Party of the United States supported Lovestone. So it was tricky. But Moscow gold plus a firm hand plus the occasional espionage action, no doubt, made sure that Lovestone was out. So that's the sort of thing that happened. So, I mean, just to be clear, if you were a member of a communist party, like the Communist Party of Great Britain, Communist Party of the United States of America, you could not like abstract art. You could not do anything, you could not like stream of consciousness novels like James Joyce.
Ulysses.
There was a right way to write novels, which incidentally, just as a little aside, their idea of a good novel was very much similar to Ayn Rand's. That was a bit later, but anyway, and it was called socialist realism, and it was anyway.
We the Living, but the communist version.
They're very well. Especially something like the Fountainhead. You know, it's very much like socialist realism. So you had to be a socialist realist. You could not approve of the ideas of Sigmund Freud. So there were all these things that were part of the communist package that you had to accept.
This is sounding a lot like Rand.
Yeah. If you don't agree with Ayn Rand 100%, you're not an
various people have noted this from time to time. This was the communist movement. It was a formidable worldwide movement that had, I mean, the small numbers usually. In Britain, I think the Communist Party never exceeded 60,000. And most of the time it went up and down. It had a high turnover rate, but usually the membership was around 30,000. I'm not sure about the membership of the US Communist Party, but I think it was similar, although in a bigger population, national population, of course. But I think it was similar, around 30, 40,000, something like that. So this was the communist movement. So in 1935, Trofim Lysenko became the ideological leader of Soviet agriculture, and in every communist party throughout the world, everybody jumped to attention and opposed genetics. It's because, so what, I'll say a little bit about Lysenko's ideas. It began with something called vernalization, which was already well known, that if you treat seeds in a certain way before you plant them, you can sometimes it can have an effect upon the way they develop when they're planted and germinate, right? So wheat, you can, if you reduce wheat grains that are going to be used as seed to a very low temperature, and do certain other things, then it will become like winter wheat. You can grow it in a colder temperature. So this held out hope, that Siberia could be turned.
So that's true, though.
I'm not an expert on growing wheat, so I don't know to what extent it's true. But all the sources I've seen say that there is some truth in it, and that it was known before Lysenko. It was a common thing. But he developed this, and you can see that this idea harmonizes well with the communist outlook because it suggests that environment is more important than heredity, and they had this idea of creating a new socialist man. I should say, by the way, that in communist, in the West we used to call communist countries, the governments and the political parties in those countries didn't say we're communists, they said we're socialist. Communism lies in the future because Lenin had introduced the idea that socialism is a stage between capitalism and communism, right? Marx never held that, but Lenin did. But Lenin introduced that.
I thought that
So
was
that's
a
where the
Marx
Marxist
idea.
Leninist
No. There's absolutely no suggestion of that in Marx. In fact, it's definitely quite the opposite. Anyway, there are all kinds of things that could be said about that, but I don't want to diverge too much. So what happened in Russia was that people who were teaching genetics were told to stop, and if they didn't, they might lose their jobs, or they might be hauled off to prison, they might be shot. In other words, Lysenkoism became the only permissible view of heredity of living things, as well as the only basis for agronomy, which is a name that means agricultural science, a word that means agricultural science. So, in the West, the overwhelming view, there was almost no, in fact, there was no departure from this view in the West, was that Lysenkoism was pseudoscience. It was a lot of baloney. It was a kind of madness, and this is the crucial point, people in the West had a ready explanation for why this could happen. And the explanation was, it could happen because the Soviet Union lacked democracy, and therefore it lacked free debate, in which Lysenko would be defeated and would eventually laughed out of the room. So this was the standard view that by the way, I should say this, that Lysenkoism was this dominant force. Stalin died in 1953, and then there was a period where there was a bit of questioning of Lysenkoism, but Khrushchev was just as dedicated to Lysenkoism as was Stalin. And so when Khrushchev gradually got more and more power in a few years, and Khrushchev, more or less, there's a few slight differences, but more or less was just as committed to Lysenkoism as Stalin had been. And so Khrushchev was removed from office in 1965. So the period of total domination of Soviet Russia by Lysenkoism goes from 1935 to 1965, with a few years where it was somewhat moderated. But basically, when Khrushchev was removed from office in 1965, then this devotion to Lysenko went away. So there's 30 years basically where it was dominant, and after the fall of Khrushchev, opinion was gradually allowed to come into conformity with world opinion, and so Lysenko became a person that nobody noticed, and when he died, I think in 1976, nobody paid any attention. You know, he didn't get obituaries in the Soviet press. It was just forgotten. Because they come round to genetics, right? So the view in the West was that this was an aberration caused by lack of democracy. So my question is, what do we say when the same kind of thing happens in the West, the Western democracies? And the example, I give 3 examples in that piece that's reprinted in Conquistador with his pants down. And the 3 examples I pick are the low-fat diet, which is responsible for killing millions of people. It's responsible for the 3 great plagues: obesity, diabetes, and Alzheimer's dementia, all of which are caused by excessive consumption of carbohydrates. So the low-fat diet was an appalling thing, based on pseudoscience and also based on the kind of attacks on people who dissented, losing their jobs, losing their research grants if they were scientists, and all that kind of thing. The low-fat diet, then the global warming catastrophism, which again the same kind of thing happened. If you criticised the global warming hypothesis, things would go bad for you if you were in science at all. But in general, you would be censored, you'd be deleted, you'd be cancelled. It was a word that it was invented around this time in the West, not in the Soviet Union. And then the third example would be the COVID narrative, with both the lockdowns and the vaccines, where again we see the same kind of pseudo-scientific cult being imposed by the government and by the scientific establishment, at least in the sense that the members of the scientific establishment didn't dare to dissent because they would suddenly become denounced heretics. So when I wrote this piece, I gave those 3 examples, and I substantiated it a little bit, that how unscientific they were. I've recently become slightly knowledgeable about another example, which I didn't know about when I wrote that piece, and that is LNT. And LNT is refuted in this book, which is just hot off the press, the LNT report by Mike Conley. So LNT is the theory of radioactivity, ionizing radiation to be technically correct, which took hold in the 1940s, which became a tremendously entrenched dogma. and where to question it, if you were in science, you could be destroyed, as with these other examples. But if you were not in science and you questioned it, like if you wrote an article in a magazine, there would be something which would later be called cancellation. The tremendous hostility towards anybody who questioned LNT. So what is LNT? LNT stands for linear no threshold. And this has become a bit topical in a small way because when President Trump signed the executive order greenlighting nuclear energy in June of this year, there was quite a lot of technical stuff in the executive order, obviously not written by Trump himself, unless he's even cleverer than we suspect he might be. But it mentions LNT and says it's unscientific and it's been refuted. So suddenly you had lots of people, including journalists, saying, what the hell is a LNT? Right? Well, this book, the LNT report, what's the phrase? Full disclosure, I have an interest in this book because I'm employed by the company that publishes it. And in fact, I was the in-house editor for this book. So I have in fact become extremely well acquainted with this book. In the sense that as in-house editor, I've been over every sentence of this book many times. I can tell you just as much as the author could tell you about it. In some cases a bit more. Let's hope he never watches this video. But anyway, it's a good book. It's like a detective story, and it traces how LNT became dogma, despite not having any sound scientific backing. And the story is told very well, stage blow by blow, stage by stage. I won't try and recapture each of these stages because that would take too long. But I will say that part of the reason why any of these things, any of these doctrines which become kind of totalitarian in their impact, even in democratic countries, is that people become emotionally very attached to them. So, you know, we've all met people who are very emotionally attached to the idea of global warming. So people became very emotionally attached to LNT because they felt that they could say that any amount of radiation, any amount of ionizing radiation causes some damage to the human body. And the more of it, of course, the more damage it causes. So this is the linear idea. In other words, zero radiation, there will be no damage caused by radiation. But even a tiny increase, a tiny amount of radiation will cause some damage. And then a big amount will cause more damage and maybe kill you quickly, right? So that's the idea. There is something to be said about that. Yes, it was usually combined with the idea to make it even worse, that if you had a bit of radiation on one day and then a bit of radiation a day later or a month or a year later, you could add those up. In other words, the total amount of radiation that you received over your lifetime, even though it was very tiny at any one point, would add up and it would do damage to you. So basically, all this is totally wrong, as we now know. So one point that should be made is this. We are all subject to what's called background radiation, natural background radiation. We all get radiation all the time. This radiation comes, a little bit of it comes from the sun, not too much, because radiation like visible light, like being able to see red, blue, and green, right? That's radiation, but it's not ionizing radiation. Now there is ultraviolet, which is slightly ionizing. Ionizing radiation is radiation which will break up an atom, and what that means is it will break up a few atoms in a big mass, like a human body. And generally speaking, in a human body or any other animal body, if you break up an atom, that's a damage, right? So this is the idea of ionizing radiation. So ionizing radiation comes a little bit from the sun. Much of it comes from the cosmos. It comes from exploding stars billions of light years away. If you're a star in the universe somewhere, the chances that you're going to explode, it could become a supernova, is very slight. But there are so many stars all around us, everywhere, a long way away, that they're always popping off. So wherever you look, in any direction in the universe, there are always supernova happening, stars exploding, pop, 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 everywhere, there. And all those stars send out radiation. And it goes all over the universe, and it reaches us, and it goes through our bodies. So right now, through all of our bodies, there is these cosmic rays. Now there's a slight point that you have to get there. Generally speaking, these particles that come from these exploding stars, they're traveling at close to the speed of light. They break up and become much less harmful at the top of the atmosphere. So most of them don't get to us. But still, they break up, they become smaller, and they do pass through us all the time. So it's difficult to say that any amount of radiation must be highly damaging, because we've been living with radiation all our lives, and throughout the whole origin and evolution of life on this planet, there's always been radiation. Now, the third place that radiation comes from is the rocks around us, right? The earth and the rocks around us. Granite sends out quite a lot of radiation. And there are other, all the phosphorus in the world. You need phosphorus to live. But all phosphorus in the world is radioactive, and it's quite noticeable. It shows up on a Geiger counter, right? So if you eat a lot of bananas, you're going to become more radioactive because they contain a lot of phosphorus. But you need phosphorus in order to live. So here we have a puzzle, if you accept LNT. How can it be that we've always had radiation and life has evolved with this radiation? And I should mention that what's coming from the sun and coming from the cosmos is about the same as it's always been. There's a few qualifications to that, but basically that's the case. The radiation that comes from rocks and earth and all that gets less over time, because in the process of being radioactive, these substances become less radioactive, and you can measure what's called their half-life. How long does it take for phosphorus to halve its the amount of radiation it's sending out. And I don't happen to know the answer, but let's suppose it's 100,000 years.
Are you saying that because we've always had radiation, that there's absolutely no limit on how much radiation
No,
we can
no.
get without it being harmful?
No, I'm
What are you
saying
trying to
that
say?
I'm saying that there's a different. I'm saying that the dose makes all the difference.
Mhm.
A low dose is not harmful like a big dose, only less. It's not harmful at all. And in fact, this frightens people, but I will say it. You need some amount of radiation, and many people are not getting enough. And this has a lot of repercussions. In other words, it's just like poison. Generally speaking, with a chemical poison, a little bit of it may do you some good. But if you increase the dose, it becomes more harmful. So radiation is just like that. Now, back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, people would have said, even scientifically informed people would have said, how can that be? Because we know how the immune system works to enable the body to fight poisons, but there is no immune system to fight radiation. Radiation causes damage. And what has been learned since the 60s is that there is a vast amount of self-repair by living cells that's going on all the time. So you're a human being with a body, and let's say you have 40 trillion cells in your body, something like that, right? 30 to 40 trillion cells. At any moment, many millions of those cells are suffering damage from radiation, and the body is repairing that, and it's used to doing this. It happens all the time. So we now know about the fact that living cells are always repairing themselves, are always ready to repair themselves. So at every second there are billions of repair jobs being done by cells in your body.
Well, cancer is always being created in the body,
Right.
like these little micro cancers, and usually our immune system or whatever fight it off.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
So this has all been discovered quite recently. Cellular biology is most of cellular biology has been discovered in the last, since the 60s, and it's still growing, this knowledge. I did give an opening here a while ago about hormesis, and hormesis to me is one of the most fascinating aspects of that, and this is where a low dose is actually beneficial, or in some cases essential to life. Because if you think about it, there are many minerals and vitamins which you absolutely need, but if you up the quantity, they can kill you.
The iron.
Iron, almost all of them actually.
H2O.
If you drink a few gallons of water quickly, it's quite likely to kill you, especially if it's distilled water or rainwater. In other words, doesn't have any electrolytes.
Diluted.
To me, one of the most fascinating things is the fact that in small doses, these things are beneficial, and in larger doses, there is a threshold, just what LNT says there isn't. But not only is there a threshold which suggests it's harmless below a certain level, it might be positively beneficial or even necessary to life below a certain level. So this has transformed what's known about living cells and how they respond to radiation. So, but the question, so we come back to this. We've learned, when I say we, I mean scientists in general, and I don't know what they know, so I'm using it in a sort of vicarious way. We've learned, the collective human mechanism has learned that the body can take care of itself most of the time. Of course, there are cases of cancer, and there are harmful things, but we need a certain amount of radiation. And of course, the interesting thing is, this has always been known. If you take the waters, as the well-to-do rich used to say, what do? You go to a spa. What is a spa? It's a place that has a high level of radiation. And everybody has known this all along. And people take the waters at some health spa, and they drink the water that comes from a health spa. What are they getting? They're getting radiation, and it improves their health. They're increasing the level of radiation, and that improves their health. To me, that's the most fascinating thing about all this. But from the point of view of policy towards whether we encourage nuclear energy or discourage it, it doesn't matter whether it's positively beneficial or whether it's just harmless. The point is there is a threshold. Below a certain level, it doesn't do you any harm. I've probably said enough to get a discussion started. I'll just say what. I'll just try offer some answers to the question: why does this happen? Why do we get these cultish adherence to a certain theory, which is then forced upon people, where discussion is censored, dissenters are persecuted, and so on. And we've seen this with COVID, and we've seen this with the low fat diet, and so on. We've seen it in these cases. And one of the things that's interesting is that what happens when it dies away. Now, it used to be thought that if you eat a lot of fat, it's going to clog your arteries, and it used to be thought that if you eat a lot of fat, it's going to make you fat. Well, this is the exact opposite. If you eat a lot of fat, it's going to tend to make
Something happened.
It's going to tend to make you slim, because as long as you don't eat a lot of carbohydrate with the fat, right?
What happened was that
right.
the President Eisenhower had a heart attack.
Yeah.
And then it came to light that a lot of men were having heart attacks. And they needed to, including the president, and then they tried to find out why so many men were having heart attacks. And then that came out with the with the low fat diet. The reason why Eisenhower had a heart attack was saturated fats and cholesterol.
But was there some kind of thing, I'm trying to remember what Jeff used to talk about, where like he or another president, they were like a heavy smoker, but they didn't want to talk about that?
I don't know enough about Eisenhower, but I just know that when he did have a heart attack that brought to light how many men were having heart attacks, and then that's why they went after
all men eat meat, all men smoke, all men.
Well,
I don't know if the president smoked, but I know that he had a heart attack.
Oh, Eisenhower smoked.
What?
Eisenhower smoked.
I think the idea that our late friend Jeff would talk about was that that they wanted to demote the idea that it was due to smoking. They didn't want to relate that, so they went on to this low carb thing because they didn't want to talk about the smoking.
Okay, so there was a corporate interest involved.
Yeah, I think, if I
4
remember
packs a day,
correctly.
according to
Most of the
Google.
low-fat
What?
foods.
Eisenhower had a 4-pack a day habit.
That, yeah, I think
Okay,
it was
okay,
Eisenhower.
this is
A lot
being
of
recorded,
stress.
don't all talk at once.
Oh, okay.
You're the chairman.
Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry, yeah.
The moderator?
No, I'm chairman. I have, you know, the.
Like Chairman Mao and.
He's the chairman.
Gavel.
He's the chairman, I'm the
Supreme leader.
leader.
So he can revoke my powers and authorities
At any moment.
At any moment, and
So I think that person over there, who just a random bystander over there, had something to say. And,
the chair recognizes Lisa.
The
Relatively.
rise of low-fat and low-fat foods also was, these foods were filled with corn syrup,
yes.
you know, which, I mean, that's really what blossomed all the diabetes.
You know, I mean, yeah, and things that are just as bad as corn syrup, like orange juice. You know, so before the 50s, when you had this, Ansel Keys had got on board with this whole low-fat diet thing. There was you got early in the century, you got Kellogg's producing cornflakes and trying to pretend that this was good for your health. So you know, so you've got Americans who either had eaten meat for breakfast or had longed for the day when they could afford to eat meat for breakfast, right? Suddenly we're being told that if you begin the day with a glass of orange juice and a bowl of cornflakes with milk and maybe chopped banana, you know, this was a road to better health. You can, if you want to take a sledgehammer to someone's health, what could be better than a glass of orange, beginning every day with a glass of orange juice, a bowl of cornflakes, milk, and chopped banana. I mean, this is a huge carbohydrate load, beginning with this glass of orange juice, which is just like drinking corn syrup.
Part of this complete
Sure,
breakfast.
sure.
In fact, fruit juice in general is just a killer. So that was well underway, that idea was well underway early in the century when Kellogg started manufacturing cornflakes and so on. You know, you can't think of a worse way to begin the day with this huge spike in your blood sugar.
We have to talk about religion. He was a Seventh-day Adventist.
Right.
And he
Who's
wanted-
Kellogg?
Yes, R.J. Kellogg was a Seventh-day Adventist and thought that your food should be bland and not spicy.
Right.
And
Well, he
so
was
the
wrong.
cornflakes were supposed to be
But you can
bland.
have bland meat.
Yeah, but why would you?
I think he was vegetarian, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
I thought,
Yeah. Well, a lot of this is tied up with vegetarianism. Yeah. So, yes.
Part of the thing was to combat supposedly masturbation, or the
Very
desire
much.
for masturbation or something like that.
yes.
Where the food was so
But that
bland.
had to do with
Masturbation causes
Kellogg's.
cancer, so.
With cornflakes, because it's so bland.
Oh yeah, that's another thing men do in court.
I don't know if
in
that's like
addition
an
to
old
smoking,
wives' tale, supposedly.
smoking and eating meat.
It's so bland that, I don't know.
Kellogg.
Wait, you said this word masturbation. What is that?
Google it.
Ellen, would you explain what this concept stands for?
Well, no, I'm just wondering what these two things have to do. I mean, I don't know, did they actually know that, that it was bad for you back then?
No. I mean,
When
they
Kellogg came out with
you
it?
know, when
Did
you
they
think
know?
about what happened, I mean, the real bad stuff came after the 50s.
Right.
Because what happened with Ansel Keys did the 7-country study. And by the way, a great book on this subject, this is a truly great book, is The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Teichholz. And she does a wonderful job of explaining everything that happened, of how it was misinterpreted, sometimes deliberately, how information was suppressed, how studies were done, and then because they didn't support the idea that fat is the problem, they were suppressed. And so Ansel Keys did this 7-country study. And 7 countries sounds like a lot, right? But first of all, it was known that there were some countries these were 7 countries in Europe. I think they were all in Europe.
Small sample size.
It was known that there were some European countries where there was a comparatively high level of consumption of fat and a low level of heart disease. That was known. And so Ansel Keys avoided those countries, right, like Sweden, France, and so on. So that was one thing. But then, if you go, first of all, the very curious way that they selected a small number of people from each of these countries, very biased way, she goes into it, all the ways in which, and then the 7-country study, the conclusions were widely trumpeted and in support of the low-fat diet. Ansel Keys went back and did the same countries later, I think in 1984 actually, and failed to replicate these results. But that was really, that wasn't news. That was. This is what happens, when it reminds me a bit of the whole climate change thing. Whenever a place has a record hot day, meaning record for that day in the last 140 years, which is as long as the thermometer record goes, then it's reported. But whenever a place has the lowest temperature for so many years, or since records were kept, which happens every day to some places, that's not news at all. So it's like this selectivity. So anyway,
there's a problem. Eisenhower's had a heart attack. It brings to light how many men in the United States have heart attacks. So let's research, why are these men having heart attacks?
right, yeah.
My dad smoked. I don't know if it had anything to do with it, but
Steak and eggs. In other words, you're saying steak and eggs, breakfast of champions?
That's great. Steak and eggs, I can't imagine a better breakfast. Yeah.
Yep.
So are we
You're
gonna
trying
say,
to determine why.
But you don't want toast with it. That's it.
'Cause
Don't
that's-
spoil
Oh,
the
yeah.
whole thing.
Because that's stupid carbs you don't need.
There needed to be research as to why there were so many men having heart attacks.
I think I heard that theory. I think it's probably concluded that estrogen has an effect of protecting women from heart attack. But women have lower rates of heart attack until they reach menopause, where they have the same rate of heart attack as men.
So
I think that was
stop
concluded. I heard that
menstruating
from
and then you
one time.
stop losing blood.
Was that?
So when you
You stop
menstruate, you
losing-
lose blood, you lose iron,
And
right?
you,
I don't know. This
you al-
estrogen. Estrogen is
you
not
also lose
loss of blood.
estrogen.
But what about iron too, when you?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, there's
That's as deep I
There's
could
also
get.
theories about
Sorry.
the iron as well.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
have your period, you lose blood and you lose some iron,
And that could
I
be
thought
very
metabolism
healthy,
was
yeah.
too much.
which led some scientists to say donate blood, not out of charity, but to basically give yourself
I don't think
a
so.
period.
David, did you?
What'd you say?
David, did you actually give your thoughts on what causes this kind of thing to happen?
Yes, okay.
'Cause I might have missed
I
it.
didn't get to that.
Okay.
I kept meaning to get to that. First of all, I think there's a number of things. I don't know if I'm going to remember all the ones I stated in my article, but I'll try. One thing is this. I think that that humans have a natural, genetically caused inclination to conform. So cultishness, or going with what everybody's saying, I think that's a very powerful and inherent characteristic. In fact, I would take it a bit further and I would say that there is a high proportion of people, let's say 95%, I don't know what it is, that are different to the other 5%. And I think there is a genetic cause for this. Essentially, imagine that you go to, let's say, an American public school, and you're a little kid. There are some of those little kids who actually they listen to what the teacher is saying, and they think dispassionately, well, maybe that's true, maybe it isn't, but I'll go along with it. But then that's the 5%. In other words, they have a clear idea that truth doesn't depend upon what the teacher says. It may happen to coincide with it if you're lucky, but it doesn't depend upon that. That's not the definition of truth. Truth is not what the teacher says. But the other 95% of the population, they actually think that truth is what the teacher says. So, or meaning whoever's in authority telling you something.
Yeah, if it's
and this I think arises because human beings in the course of their evolution were pack animals. They tended to group themselves into packs of, I don't know exactly how many, let's say 100 people, 100 individuals.
Or maybe like the Dunbar number
between
of
100 and 200, let's say. And there's reasons for doing that, because you can defend yourself as a group much more effectively, and therefore there's an evolutionary advantage in people as individuals, to some extent subordinating themselves to the pack, right? So this is, I think, causes this urge towards conformity. Now, so 95% of people think that truth is what the pack says, which means whoever's in authority says.
And then because of that, people who don't conform, starting when they're children, they're usually ostracized.
Right.
They're bullied. It's very rough on them,
right.
unless they have some way to counteract that, which a lot of them don't.
Yeah, or they may be a bit more clever, and they may just keep quiet about their doubts about the establishment narrative.
But I mean, in general, children, if they're seen as being different and standing out, they're it's kind of like the Japanese saying, the nail that stands out gets hammered down.
So that's right. So this is one. So basically, I think it's inherent that it's inherent in belief systems that can appeal to people. And people have a desire for a belief system that makes sense of a lot of things, and I think it's inherent in human beings. Before anything new or modern or terrible happens, it's just there all the time that there is this conformity, and so that's one. It's a genetic drive towards conformity. So when the government comes in and starts behaving in a tyrannical way and forcing people to believe something, they're not dealing with the human material that is completely open to anything. The government that does this, or the leader who does this, actually has something working with him, and that is the natural inclination of people. So that's one thing. Also, one factor that has struck me, and that I didn't make explicit in this, is that once you're convinced that something's a serious problem, it's tempting to think that it's okay to exaggerate it. And a lot of these cultish belief systems, they identify a danger, and then they blow it out of all proportion, and people may actually consciously think, well, this is a serious problem, so it can't hurt if I say that this problem is 10 times worse than it really is. Where's the harm?
Like all the polar bears are being stranded on melting icebergs.
Right, yes.
Like autism and immigration.
Right.
What?
Like autism and immigration.
What?
Immigration is the biggest threat to the country right now.
One of.
Trump, half the country, probably 60% of the country believes it, even though immigrants, from my experience, illegal or otherwise, notwithstanding the current host, are less likely to commit crimes. So
Less
it's
likely than who?
than citizens.
Native born.
No, not native born, citizens. Could be naturalized citizens, could be anybody. My parents were immigrants, naturalized. I don't know if they were quote unquote illegal at any point, but I can tell you that they weren't criminals. I never saw them commit a crime.
Well, without it getting sidetracked.
Hold on.
All right.
You have to apply
He's
the
a chair.
same, I agree with David.
Yeah, you had 30 minutes at the beginning.
Yeah. So
That was by request, yeah, go
So
ahead.
immigration is exactly like used as this sort of groupthink, like, oh, immigrants bad. Just completely ignoring that the fact that this entire country was built by immigrants. This is not a political thing. This is just like a fact.
But
No, it's-
Charlie
no, it's not.
Kirk,
It's
Charlie
not a
Kirk
fact.
says
It's propaganda.
there's a difference
it's not
between settlers and immigrants.
Charlie Kirk's an idiot. Of course
I'm
he's
just
gonna say
quoting him.
idiotic things.
I'm not.
I mean,
They're
Settlers-
the same
That's a
thing.
judgment.
They're the same
Okay.
thing.
They are not the same thing.
Yes,
Well, you
they
have to ask
are.
him to
not.
make the
It's the
distinction.
same rhetoric that the Palestinians
Conqueror,
use.
immigrant.
Hey.
whatever.
There's some truth in that. I don't. I'll totally agree with you. You know how I think of Charlie Kirk, right? But there's something to think about this distinction that he's making.
I think it is
Settlers
an
and
important-
immigrants.
He's a pundit, Eric. He's looking for clicks. That's all he's looking
That-
for.
Yeah, I won't
doesn't
label him.
refute-
I just take the.
He wears a socialism sucks T-shirt
Okay.
and then votes for a border wall. And
Yeah, I don't
Donald
want to
Trump,
sound like
who
I'm
is now
defending
the,
him.
Order.
the comrade,
Order.
comrade Trump.
Back to-
I don't like it, but I don't want to
Order.
sound.
The chair does
defending
not
it.
recognize any immigration talk at the moment.
Okay,
The
can I-
chair.
How
Can
about
we finish?
how about autistic
Autism?
immigrants? He just said
Yeah,
autism is bad. Immigration is bad.
Order.
How about autistic immigrants?
No,
Eric.
It's worse.
Autism, yeah, exactly.
Eric, don't make me exact
Do you
punishment.
wanna sit here, Bernie?
No.
Oh, okay.
He wants
I
food.
never get up.
Oh, okay.
Bernie, good to see you, by the way.
But okay, I think you said a few things that I think if David wants to respond to that, David, do you have any remarks?
I mean, what you were describing,
well-
David, was Trumpism, basically.
Well,
Like, just
I
make
you see,
people
I
scared.
think the argument against, I think there's peculiar circumstances of the Biden years where, like, millions of people were quite suddenly accelerated into the country, given huge subsidies, and
Given huge subsidies more than usual?
oh yeah.
How
Well,
so?
normally an illegal immigrant doesn't get any money from the government, but under Biden, what happened was they were getting put up in hotels. They were getting a weekly allowance. You know, they were getting, which in fact the amount they were being paid was more than most social
Oh.
security recipients get. And you know, there was just a sudden. I mean, I think that.
Are you talking about asylum seekers? Are you, I mean, I was working with refugees just a few years ago, and I was working at a refugee agency, and the refugees are put under tremendous pressure to get a job very quickly. And often they don't even speak English.
Right.
I ran into a group before the crisis started, years ago, 4 South American, I think they were from South America, but they approached me as I'm washing my car, and they're like, the first thing they said, food. There happened to be a love fridge in my neighborhood, so they went and got some food. Second thing they said was trabajo, trabajo. They wanted to work. They could have been rapists, I don't know, but the guy, anybody on the street could be. But anyway, I wanted to bring it back to the thing, the topic.
Yeah. Anyway,
There was a for those of you familiar with Cosmos, the Carl Sagan show from like 45 years ago.
I'm familiar, but I didn't see it.
So Neil deGrasse Tyson redid it.
Yeah.
He did a couple more seasons, and he did specifically an entire episode on Lysenko and the team of Soviet scientists, Russian Soviet scientists, who kind of fought against him. Vivalov, I think, are you familiar with him, his story? I mean, it's like just the most incredible story of these courageous Soviet scientists who fought against Lysenkoism, and maybe post it to the, Eric, you post these too? These recordings?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I'll put it in the comment section or something. It's
Oh,
it's
yeah,
a really,
absolutely.
really good kind of like vignette, really well done, explaining the whole situation, kind of with animation and stuff. And tells of, there was kind of like an organic opposition among the biologists and the scientific community in the Russian Soviet Union. So that's all I got.
Yeah, could I just say this? I was beginning to enumerate some of the reasons.
You're at number 2. You're at number 2.
Yeah. So one reason I think why you get this kind of thing, why you get this kind of thing in a kind of democratic Western society, it is due to the increasing role of government in supporting science. Because what this does is it means that decisions as to what things should be funded tends to become over time politicized. So there are various grants awarding entities in government which give money to scientific research. And what happens to them is, they may start out with the best of intentions, but what happens to them is that they tend to think we should be using government money to support important things, not trivial things. So if you come with a research project that seems unrelated to any current policy issue, it will tend to be downgraded in the minds of these decision makers. And they will tend to say, we should be really supporting research into these important matters. That presupposes that they have a kind of ranking of what's important. So if you have a proposal, I've read some accounts of young scientists, people who've got a degree in science, and they're pursuing their careers, and they want to do some kind of research. And what happens to those people is they usually have someone who is their mentor, who helps them to play the system, get a grant out of the government. Of course, this happens in the arts as well, of course, but it happens in the sciences. What the mentor will say is, "Oh yeah, you're interested in the habits of this particular insect, and the you know what I'm going to say?
No, but I'm listening.
You're interested in the habits of this particular insect and how it lives its life, and how this fits into the ecology and all that. But what you need to do to increase your chance of getting a grant to do this work, you need to look at the effects of climate change on this insect. Now, what would happen if what will happen to this insect that you're so interested in if the global temperature rises by such and such an amount? So the young aspiring scientist says, well, I don't know really, probably not much. So the mentor says, well, supposing that the temperature was to go up by 50 degrees. and the young aspiring scientist says, well, yeah, that would probably have a lot of harmful consequences for this insect. So, okay then, well, this is the way you write your grant. You say that study of this particular insect will bring out the ecological consequences of climate change. And see this, so this kind of thing is going on all over the place.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do think there is some problem with government funding a lot of research, but I would, I mean, I would also guess that if it was just corporate interests, they're very biased, and if they just were mostly funding research, that could result in very biased results as well.
But they wouldn't be biased all in one direction.
Like with the smoking,
Well,
of course, yeah, with the nicotine effects and everything for half a century, they
well, the powerful,
lied.
yeah, the powerful ones would be the ones that would get the most research, funding of the most research. They'd be able to fund the most research because they'd be most powerful. I mean, but I mean, I do say, my dad was a researcher. That's what he did most of his career, and he had a long career. He passed away a few years ago. Toward the end, he had an unpopular idea. He was able to get research on it, but it was hard. I mean, it was hard. I think he still was, but it was a lot harder. He had the idea that antipsychotics weren't really that effective, especially in the long run. That the right or wrong, that was his view, that people who were on it long term, their results were worse. Now, that's another story. What?
He was a heretic. He was against the
Yeah,
dogma.
yeah. So I mean, it was harder, and he was able to get some, but it was a lot harder. But I'm not sure that, they used to have these studies that said, oh, we've proven that black people are inferior, because of our studies, back when the reviews. I'm not sure if that was corporate or if that was government funded research.
So there's a question of, if the government doesn't fund scientific research, who will?
Who will?
Well,
yeah.
there is an interesting book on this kind of general area called The Economic Laws of Scientific Research by, I think his name is Keeley. It's an Irish name, I think, Kealey. And he presents an argument that there should be no government funding for science, and it was better when there was very little government funding for science. And he lays it out. But the thing is here, when the government funds science, or not science in particular, when the government has a large role in allocating resources for research or other things, what happens? The corporate interests get control of government. And we see this with the big pharma. Big pharma is spending big money all the time to capture government. So the fact that there is this handy device called government, which is doling out money all over the place, means that the business interests know where to go. I mean, and they know that when they do that, they're going to have a monopoly position. And they're going to, you see, and it often works out better than you could imagine. Look at big pharma. They not first of all they get patents, and the idea of the patent is drug companies need.
It's a moat.
Drug companies need a lot of money for research, so let's give them a temporary monopoly, and then they can. Which is called a patent, if they come up with a drug or another thing like a vaccine, but it will say a drug. And so that company, if it gets a patent, it knows that if there weren't the patents, they could still make a drug and sell it. But they get the same rate of return as every other business. Whereas if they've got a patent, and if there's a huge demand for the drug, then they make tens of billions of extra super monopoly profits effortlessly, almost effortlessly. They go to the effort of producing the drug. But the thing, They just get huge profits, which they would not get but for the patent. But they can do even better than that. They can get the government to force people to buy the products, and this is what they did with the vaccine, the COVID vaccine. You know, they started using government influence, and they were giving the vaccine to people who couldn't benefit from it, like healthy young kids. No way that even forgetting the fact that this vaccine wasn't a real vaccine, it was dangerous gene therapy. Forget that. And let's suppose it was an effective vaccine. It couldn't do any good to healthy young kids who are not going to be at risk of dying from COVID anyway, because COVID is basically another strain of the common cold. That's all it is. Like all new strains, it's particularly dangerous at first, so it has a higher death rate than ordinary common cold. But after 6 months or so, it will be down to that because mutations will take place, and by natural
So it has a
selection.
higher death rate, and what's the other reason it's dangerous?
Oh, either one of those.
You mean the COVID shot?
No, the SARS-CoV-2.
It's more
You said
contagious.
it has a higher
Well,
death
no.
rate.
The point is, a new strain of a virus is going to. The tendency is going to be for it to be at the beginning to have a higher fatality rate.
Higher fatality rate plus.
What?
Plus, you're leaving out a very important part. It's much more highly transmissible.
That's not.
This is something very simple to calculate. The
That's
R
not
naught
going to.
rate
That's not going to be true.
is about double. No, like scientists know this.
No,
And I'm not
scientists
trying to-
know the exact
That's what we're
opposite.
talking about, the
Scientists know the
scientists.
exact opposite. What happens, a new strain is often, usually, less transmissible, but more
talking about the
lethal.
2020.
But then what happens is it mutates, and by natural selection, it becomes more transmissible, much more, and less lethal. That's what happens.
And
That's
the
prediction.
vaccine will increase the cycle. Have new strain from more lethal to less lethal, because vaccine you have more quickly than not
Right.
that to have the
So let's say-
next strain of
Yeah.
lethal.
So let's say Trump was in power when SARS-CoV-2 first became. Oh wait, he was, and he pushed the vaccine.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Oh, that was for Vic. So anyway, my real question.
Hey,
is-
wait. The chair gives himself the privilege of recognizing himself and interrupting Alex for just a moment. That's one of those things, you know, like when people say that MAGA is a cult, like there's so many examples of how that's not true. And one of the examples is there have been times when, you know, Trump is doing his rallies that I haven't really watched one of them, but my understanding is, you know, you've seen one, you've seen them all for the most part. You know, they just, you know, they want to take part in the crowd energy and all that. They boo Trump.
Yeah, but then when you ask them about it later, they'll say, "Oh, we don't." It's like talking to a wall. They don't even acknowledge that he said that he. Oh, it's because the Democrats forced him to. It's Fauci's fault. Fauci forced him to do it. So anyway, we're getting sidetracked.
Well, but it is true that the vaccine issue was an issue where there was friction between Trump and the MAGA movement. And they
not
did
really,
boo.
not
They
really.
did boo
Yes,
at
yes,
his rallies.
really.
They
No,
did
not
boo
really.
at his
Because
rallies
they're surrounded
whenever
by
he
Trump
mentioned.
people, and I argue this to them, and they poo-poo it. They say, "Oh no, it's, you know, it's always Fauci's fault. It's always the CDC's fault. It's always Biden's fault. It's always somebody else's fault. It's not his fault, no matter what you say." So my real question is, David, if there was no government push or anything, like let's say Sweden, like we were like Sweden or whatever, do you think the hyper-capitalistic USA, the corporations, the big pharma, do you think they would have been like, how do you think they would have reacted to COVID? Do you think they would have produced vaccines and like launched multi-million-dollar ad campaigns to push it, or
Well,
what?
it depends whether they can sell it on its merits.
Do you trust? I'm an idiot. I don't know, and I wonder what do you have a science background? David, I'm not trying to be cheeky or
Not
anything, but
particularly, no.
you've read what I've read. We've all read this. I don't know if anybody else in here is a scientist, but I've tried to read as much as I can. I agree with some of the stuff you said, but I don't trust the private sector any more than I do the public sector. I've worked in both for a long time, and they're both gonna, like, at least with the public sector, you have transparency.
What?
What the hell are you smoking?
How do you know all
What
this?
new street drug
It's
have I not?
totally secretive.
How do you know all this stuff?
I mean, look.
How do you know all this stuff? Everything that you're talking about, how do we all know it?
Now I know there's a new
Reported on.
street drug that I haven't heard about that he's
How
smoking.
do we know that all the facts about the COVID trials were suppressed? Yes. How do we know that? Well, because
What
of people
facts were
like RFK Jr. writing books about it. I mean, that's how we know.
By the
We
way,
don't
what's
know
wrong?
because the government told us.
Wait, what's
In
wrong
fact,
with
they told us the opposite. They told us all kinds of things that were not true.
It's in a book, it's got to be true. What is with RFK Jr.? Like, what's his deal? Why can't he talk?
He has what's called spasmodic dysphonia.
And
Scott
what caused
Adams,
that?
huh?
What caused that?
I'm not exactly
And
sure.
we are to take health advice from this person who cannot speak?
Oh, well.
That is-
that's not
that is
really
one of the
related.
stupidest-
Am I being politically
Wait,
correct right now?
time out.
Wait, are you offended? Are you triggered? Am I being
I'm not.
politically correct?
Whoa, you have. It's an annoying habit of you ask a question and then as soon as I get 3 words out, you have to interrupt
You
it. There it
reacted.
is again.
You
There it is again. Okay, let me string together a few sentences in response without interruption because I don't know if that's just a habit you have or if that's
You
a
only
deliberate
had 3
tactic.
minutes at the beginning.
Right? It's called spasmodic dysphonia. It's something that Scott Adams had. He doesn't have it anymore, or to whatever extent he has it,
I'm
it
not
is
asking about
so
Scott Adams.
diminished.
You're-
Let me give the
you have a-
context.
wait,
You're
you
interrupting.
have a-
Nope, you're
no.
interrupting. The chair does not recognize the
You have a
interruption.
habit
The
of going
chair
on
does not recognize the interruption of Alex. You like I
sounds
will
like
figure out a
government.
way to punish and censor you in accordance with the Supreme Leader's wishes.
Censorship.
But
Can
it's not censorship.
we not keep interrupting each other?
Okay.
Can you
It's-
let Victor explain his point?
let me let me lay out the context for a quick second. I don't know if it's a genetic thing. I don't know if it's a psychological thing. Whatever it is, it's not something that was like due to poor health choices as far as we know. It's not due to he did this stupid thing and smoked this stupid street drug or did this risky activity or swam in the wrong lake with the wrong paramecium getting into his brain. It wasn't any of that. It's something, for whatever reason, it's something that it's very rare that Scott Adams had, and it's a surgical intervention that fixes it. Now, I have zero idea. It's one of the stupidest ad hominems I've ever heard of. I have zero idea how you can associate a speech impediment that somebody might have with their ability to articulate accurate information in a coherent manner by writing it down in a book. The two have no bearing on each other at all, even 0.01%. The fact that you brought that up means either you're not tall enough for the ride, or you're just throwing mud in the water just to have fun. I don't know what it is.
A little bit of that, but
Okay.
I mean, I would have been happy with I don't know as an answer, but I was trying to make a little bit of a point because what he said, I mean, he just said that, like, oh, I see kids in the airport and I can, just by looking at them, I could tell there's something wrong with their mitochondria. I mean, like, how do you take a director of the Health and Human Services secretary seriously when they make statements like that?
I don't see why that statement is inherently absurd on its face. I simply
Really?
don't.
From a scientific standpoint, none of us here are scientists, but we know enough about science where you can't just look at somebody and figure out that something. I mean,
There's all kinds of things where you can look at them
and think, oh, there's something wrong with RFK Jr.'s mitochondria. And he says he never took any drug. Actually, he says he did all kinds of risky things.
He's
in
pretty
his youth.
swole for a 50-plus-year-old.
He's
Oh,
on
yeah.
roids. He's obviously on roids.
Well,
Yeah, I feel
very
the thing
problematic.
is
But
working out all the
see, here's
Yeah.
the thing. I'm not a scientist. Just real quick, I'm not a scientist, right? And so I don't have enough like knowledge to know whether it would even be absurd or not for somebody to say, "Oh, there's something wrong with their mitochondria." For all I know, there is a vast literature on mitochondria damage or disorders or problems such that you know a typical indicator of such problems is you see these outward symptoms, and perhaps there's that kind of thing where like, oh, there's these outward symptoms that somebody can see, and Kennedy happens to be one of those people who knows that. Like, I don't know these things, but that doesn't strike me as inherently absurd on its face.
But even but Victor, even if it was inherently absurd, even if RFK Jr. has sometimes said silly things, which I'm sure he has, right? What's the relevance of that? I mean, the point is, Alex was suggesting that the government was open and was supplying us with all the relevant information. And I merely mentioned RFK Jr. as someone who brought out a lot of information that the government was actively suppressing. Now, he could be a villain, he could rape little boys, he could have taken all the dangerous drugs under the sun. It's totally irrelevant. People's personal character is totally irrelevant to what they've done and what they've actually accomplished and what they've said. And the thing is, when I got interested in the whole COVID thing, I'm pretty cynical about government.
I'm leaving, but thank you very much.
Thank
Okay,
you, it's
thanks.
been very enjoyable.
Thank you.
Unfortunately,
Okay,
I'm gonna
thanks for coming.
get my
Right.
car
The next meeting will be on the 26th of September, and it will be
Thank you.
about
I have it on my
AI, the
calendar.
dangers of AI.
I don't know if I can take this, are you taking this one? Sure.
When I started paying attention to the COVID thing, I was amazed by something. Two things amazed me, and I'm generally very cynical about government. So the system is the government grants drug companies patents, subject to certain conditions. The drug companies are supposed to ascertain that the drugs that they are trying to patent are safe and effective. They work, and then the dangers are not too great. Well, actually, almost all drugs have some bad side effects, but they're supposed to be able to establish that that the side effects are minor compared with the benefits. All that makes perfect sense. Two things amazed me about this whole system that's been set up. One is that the tests that are done for the drugs are done by the companies themselves. I could hardly believe it. I thought, no, when I first read that, I thought, somebody's making this up. But these tests are done by the companies themselves. That's the first thing. The second is, I would have assumed that that being the case, the studies that were done would be published in their full detail. That we'd be able to go to somewhere and look at an account of the research.
Are you telling me that didn't happen?
Absolutely, it never happens. It's mostly totally secret forever.
My question is,
No, hang on. Let me get this point out. That you have these two odd things, to me, amazing. That the people who do the studies are the drug companies that are going to make tens of billions of dollars if they can convince the government to get behind it, or give them a patent in the first place, but then get behind it and use their influence to persuade people and coerce people into taking these substances. So that to me is amazing. You would think there would be some independent body that would do the studies, but okay, the companies themselves do the studies, but then the full details of these studies are never made public. I mean, they may be by chance or by political developments or whatever, or by lawsuits, And, you know, and in the case of COVID, they gave them extra privileges, including total immunity from legal action. That was written into it. from the
Total
outset.
immunity from legal action?
Yeah.
Did you say immunity?
You sign off before you get the jab.
So,
There's a
so,
piece
so,
of paper.
so, I mean, and so the actual details of what happened, and the actual details of what happened has had to be dragged out bit by bit, and we still don't know most of it. But we do know that they got up to all kinds of tricks, and this is what happens with these regulatory bodies, that they get captured. So basically, the people who regulate the big pharma are the slaves of big pharma, and you know, it's a revolving door. Everybody knows this. You know, when they give up their government job, they get a big fat job with the big pharma that they've been regulating. And it's so blatant, the corruption, it's unbelievable. I couldn't believe how blatant it was. And, you know, there's an interesting book, actually, I should mention. This book, Turtles All the Way Down. This is a book about what goes on in licensing drugs, patenting, allowing patents, and so on and so forth.
Is that the one that's anonymous?
Yeah. The actual authors chose not to let their names be known. So the names are the names of the editors, people who edited it. So does everybody here know the origin of the expression "turtles all the way down"?
I used to.
Because turtles used to be like buried in the ground.
No, it's got nothing to do.
Right?
It's got nothing to do with that. No, there is an amusing anecdote that used to be told. I think some people believed it was true. I don't think it was true. So this is the story, right? A scientist who was an astrophysicist gave a talk to a popular audience, a lay audience, right, in which he explained recent developments in astrophysics. He explained the cosmos, the galaxy, the solar system, the place of the Earth in this, and so on, right? And it was well received, and he gave this talk, and the members of the public who were not scientists, but they were delighted with it. It was a good talk. And then at the end, as is often happens, individual members of the audience went up to this scientist to ask him questions, right? Just to talk to him, congratulate him, but to ask him questions if they wanted to. So a little old lady came up and joined the queue and eventually talked to the scientist, right? And she said, what you said was very interesting, but the truth is that the Earth rests on a giant elephant. And that giant elephant stands upon an even more giant turtle. So that's the truth. And the scientist said, what does the turtle stand on? And the little old lady said, you think you're very clever, young man, but it's turtles all the way down. So that's the origin of this phrase. And
Look at this guy.
But isn't the idea of turtles being in the ground like
no. This is
something
cosmology.
that like turtles actually do?
This is Hindu cosmology. Anyway, the point is, I went to Amazon, and there's quite a number of books called with this title, Turtles All the Way Down. So this is a terrible title because there's a dozen other books with this title, including, I think, one was a romance novel. But anyway, that's the origin. So this is an interesting book, and it alludes to all the kind of tricks they do. You know, what they do when they're doing these studies to see whether the drug works, let's say they get a negative result. They find the drug doesn't work. Do they say, we're on the wrong track here, let's call this off? No. They look at the numbers, and they try to find a particular selection of the numbers which will show that for that particular subset, the drug works. Right, it may be below a certain age or whatever, right? And then, having done that, they then do the study for that age group, let's say, and then they come up with some argument for why that age group was chosen, and it's usually in a boring, lengthy footnote that sounds very technical, right? But the truth is, the reason why it was chosen was because it shows a positive result for the drug. And so this kind of thing goes on all the time, it's just a racket. And I mean, of course.
So would a way to summarize it be, they don't judge the results based on what happens to the group. They choose the group based on what results they get, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's one of many tricks.
Okay.
There are many tricks. If someone objective and independent and impartial was doing the study, in many cases, they would say either that it's not very efficacious, or that the risks outweigh the benefits. But that doesn't happen, because it's the companies that do the research, and they don't have to submit their whole research practice, what happened in the research, to any outside body. To me, I was astounded when I heard this. It's just amazing.
So who would, this independent outside body, used all these terms, like who would be organizing that? Who would be in charge of that?
Well, it's the government that is authorizing this whole system anyway.
No, but in your alternative system.
Well, I mean, in a libertarian system, let's put it that way, then the government wouldn't be involved at all. If somebody wanted to market a drug, they would have to persuade doctors and patients that this was worth taking this drug.
Like 100 years ago, where we had the snake oil salesman,
Right.
which went on circus tours and sold tonics and all sorts of crazy stuff.
Right,
So
exactly.
you would prefer that sort of.
Yeah, of course, I prefer
The great
that.
libertarian theorist Dave Smith said that if enough people vote for something, then it's consent. So if enough people vote for whatever,
Snake oil.
then isn't it libertarianism?
No, libertarianism is not democracy.
No, you vote
He's
in the marketplace
referring to
by
his,
purchasing.
Alex Noreste, Dave
Yes.
Smith debate on immigration.
Right. Yeah. No. I know. When we had 2 meetings.
I'm going to
ago-
leave though. I do have to go. So
Yeah. Okay. Thanks
thanks
for
for
coming.
everything. Good to see everybody.
Yeah,
Ernie, good to see you, buddy.
Yeah, enjoyed your talk last Saturday.
Bye. Good to see everybody.
Yeah. No. I mean, in a total free market system, there would be some people who would try trickery. They'd try selling stuff that was totally ineffective, and it would be up to other people it would be up to consumers can make mistakes, and it would be up to consumers to do what it was necessary to test whether what they were being offered for sale was really effective and were really harmless.
You said.
But now, of course, if the seller makes a false claim, I'm in favour of laws against fraud. So if the purveyor of this snake oil says this is guaranteed to make you lose this particular disease or whatever, and that's not true, that could be taken to court under my preferred system, and the person relying on this product who was being defrauded by that false claim could get redress. So,
if you're dead or you
but their kin
injured,
their kin could then sue.
How do you feel?
yeah,
about,
but it can't bring you back if you're dead or you're badly injured.
Right, but what are we talking about here? The present system killed millions of people.
I know there's no perfect system. I'm not denying it. I'm just saying there's no perfect system.
No, but there's.
The libertarian
You want a
system
system that
not
is
perfect.
never ever going to kill anybody.
Hang on, I have a question regarding RFK's push for this. I probably agree with him on, like the food dyes and all that stuff. Because I have friends that come from Europe, and they'll stay with me or whatever, and they eat our food, and
They gain weight.
either they gain weight or they say it tastes metallic or whatever. And we all know that there's a difference. We allow a lot more junk in our food, the FDA or whoever. So do you think the US should have more, and I'll pose that to you also, or anybody, that the current regulatory system in the US, whether it's the FDA or the USDA or whoever, needs to ban food dyes, ban whatever else crap we put in our food? I mean, I'm kind of addicted to all the, I eat processed foods. How do you guys feel about that? And if you support RFK's push for that, don't you see kind of like a little bit of an inconsistency there? So I'll allow you to answer the question. Like, do you support RFK's push to ban unclean, quote unquote, unclean foods like food dyes?
No, I don't support that kind of thing. I don't think the government should have anything to do with people's health. They should just keep out of it. And I think that, except in the sense that there are laws, there should be laws against fraud, and there should be laws against manslaughter, murder of some kind or another. So if you sell something to somebody saying it's harmless and it's actually a poison and it kills them, then that is, you've committed murder, or committed some kind of manslaughter or whatever, homicide. That was the word I was looking for. You've committed a kind of homicide, and there should be a law against that. Now, we could have a different meeting where we went into the principles of such a law, but certainly, on the other hand, if someone freely chooses to buy and ingest a substance, and they're not being misled about it, that's up to them. And they may do something foolish. People do foolish things.
Chair recognizes Dan.
Well, this is getting very complicated fast, but like good ideas or stuff that's healthy, like strong corporations can prevent good ideas or stuff that's healthy from making it to the market, like whether it be energy related type ideas for efficient stuff or healthy food. Like corporations can hold those people down and even maybe do some other stuff to them that's not even legal. So that's something to be considered.
What can corporations do? Sorry?
So like people, I know for sure that there's technology out there where we can create energy in a very efficient way, very clean, but the effect of that would be like oil corporations like losing their clout in our economy. Like they would not be important anymore, so they would lose their profits. So those people will keep those technologies out. The corporations will keep those technologies out so they can maintain their strong presence in the way we do stuff.
So where does that tie in? What are you asking specifically?
So we can't trust that corporations are going to be able to give us food without food dyes or anything else that's unhealthy. We can't trust that would happen naturally without government intervention, because consumers are going to have that choice, because the choice is not presented to us in other areas like energy or other health-related matters.
And they're just going to pay some scientist to say whatever they want them to say, like they did with the cigarettes.
Sure, something like that. So we sort of let everything be free. Corporations are going to run.
So can I restate it and then you tell me if I've got it right, because I'm having a little trouble grasping what you're saying. Are you bringing these things up as concerns you have for the kind of more free libertarian system that he'd like to see? Is basically your response like, okay, but what about these kinds of bad things that can happen? Maybe it's not so much an objection you're raising as it is, let's call it a concern, and are you kind of kicking it back to David to find out what his response to that is, kind of?
I'm saying that I think, so like government can make laws, and then people have to follow those laws, at least they're supposed to. I'm going to kind of like create a new idea here. Corporations can do kind of the same thing. So that limits our ability as consumers to choose what we need to make us healthy.
They'll just hire a bunch of lawyers to cancel the other company who's trying to tell the truth or whatever, or be healthy or whatever, and they'll just push them out of business.
Whatever creative way you want to go about it, that's what they'll do.
Yeah,
We don't have a choice.
I am just as cynical with private sector as I am with
Right.
public sector because
right.
I've worked in both. I've seen the bullshit in both.
Right.
So the thing is, in the private sector, you do have competition. The reason that the thing that you're describing is not competition, you're talking about corporations in bed with government. And so it's the effect of government that is the problem. The government is creating these monopolies, monopoly companies, in effect, that they're lobbyists and everything, they've got them wrapped around their finger. So it isn't a free market. And the competition is the thing that would stop that from happening and allow ideas to come out, or different alternatives or whatever, if they could freely compete.
Okay, so you're still going to run into the same problem though, and I agree with David and this book, the thesis of the book, that there is too many shenanigans involved. But with the alternative, you're still going to have this corruption, quote unquote corruption, just in a different form. They're going to be paying lawyers instead of doing the revolving door of government regulatory agencies. And David even acknowledges that there should be an independent, objective third party. Like, who's that going to be? The corporations will just pay, they'll all get together and say, like, they did something with the light bulb, like standardization 100 years ago with the light bulb, where, I forget the exact details, but it was like, I think the incandescent light bulb, where it ensured that they would maximize their profits and stifle any advancements in technology with the light bulb. And again, it was something I read on the internet like a year ago, and it comes and goes, but
So you're suggesting a cartel, right? Or what do you call it? Where everybody colludes together. Is it a cartel?
No, that's already happened. It's been happening for a long time.
Oligopoly, maybe?
Where you have a bunch of companies all getting together. What do you call it with the oil companies?
Yeah, that's happened. That has happened.
Cartel. So, but you can't have that if it's open. If it's an open, free market where anybody can come into the market with their idea and present their idea, and the best idea wins.
The best idea is not winning, though. Right now, the best idea is not winning. Right now, the best ideas are being suppressed.
Well, they give an example.
But that's because of government's involvement.
A lot of stuff I have is just based upon faith and belief. Like, I believe that there's amazing technology out there for energy that's not being allowed to hit the market.
I don't think that's true. I just don't think that's true.
I know somebody who's working on something. He's a common person. He's using basic stuff, and he's creating something that's like almost like a pendulum. It's like, what's the word that describes that? Perpetual.
Yeah.
Like, it's very similar to perpetual.
When I took physics in high school, that was one of the things you learned, is that it is impossible for there to be a perpetual motion machine.
Very similar. So we're talking very efficient, like very, 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 very much efficient, more efficient.
I'll believe it when I can save 90% of my power bill.
Well, he's not going to be allowed to bring it to market.
Not allowed by whom?
They don't want you to save money on your power bill.
You could live off grid and have no need for any sort of third party.
I mean, I was going to say something similar to what Lisa was saying. That I think, generally speaking, the freer the market, the less likely that this kind of thing would be happening that you're kind of talking about, Alex. The fewer market so it's difficult because everything is intertwined and interconnected, right? You know, so we have these food companies and these big agribusinesses, and there's been a lot of, you know, consolidation and all this stuff, and, you know, a lot of the independent family farms, you know, end up selling out to like the big agribusinesses and stuff, and, you know, that's a problem, and, you know, I don't like it, but, you know, if you talk to some left-winger, they especially don't like it. You know, corporations are oftentimes a boogeyman for them, and for understandable reasons. I'm not poo-pooing it, right? But you get all this consolidation a lot of times, but a lot of times the stuff that, you know, I'm oversimplifying, the stuff that left-wingers like a lot for policy ends up begetting the, you know, other things that they really don't like. Let me give you an example. People on the left generally love the idea of an inheritance tax, right? You have an inheritance tax because, you know, people on the left, well, you know, the heirs didn't earn that money. They should, you know, it's not fair that, you know, some people can get just free money without having to work for it, and other people have to work for it and they can never escape the working class. That's unfair, that's unjust, that's economic injustice. So we should have an inheritance tax on the rich people so that we can take, you know, money from them, and because it's not fair to give it to their kids who didn't earn it, and blah, 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 right? Well, how does that manifest when people own farms? When people own farms and they want to bequeath those farms to their children in order to continue the family business of farming, what does the tax man do, inspired by left-wing ideologues who think that, you know, people shouldn't be able to, you know, give too much to their kids because it's economically unjust? Well, you get these farms that then have these massive tax burdens, right? And indeed, I haven't seen the show, but I think the show Yellowstone, the central plot point is they're having trouble figuring out how to deal with the farm because of the tax implications, right? So what does that do to all these small independent family farm businesses who want to just generationally have farming in the family? Well, they're going to sell it to big agribusinesses because that's kind of their only option left to satisfy an inheritance tax burden. That's bullshit. And that's the kind of thing that is an unfree market that begets the kind of thing where you have fewer and fewer players, where it becomes more and more likely that they'll be able to commandeer the regulatory apparatus in order to make it so that we can still pump food dyes into the stuff that Fauci wants to fix. Fauci is a band-aid for a problem that likely would be less likely to exist if certain things way back in the policy pipeline were different. Does that make sense?
Fauci is a Band-Aid?
I'm sorry.
Or RFK.
RFK. Did I say Fauci?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I misspoke. I meant RFK. Thank you. But do you get my point?
Yeah, I hate talking about economics because it's so fucking boring.
It's boring, except when people are losing their farms.
It's important.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah.
You know, that's, yeah, I mean, I probably agree with you on some of those points.
We do observe commonly, like all the time, cases where there's a big industry and another approach, technological approach, comes along and starts taking business away from that big industry, and so it shrinks and there's nothing you can do about it. And this just happens all the time.
Radio and TV.
Yeah. Newspapers and the internet. I mean, so it's not fantastic. I mean, the idea that you can always pay someone to say something wrong and that will take care of it. No, it's much harder than that.
I just had a thought, getting back to David's thoughts about letting the market decide about the artificial food dyes. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about it. So, in regard to letting the market decide, us, consumers, my question is this, and I want to hear your thoughts on it. Are there any health benefits to artificial food dyes? Like, is there anything good that we get from consuming red 40 and yellow 5 and all these different things? Is there any health benefit?
I don't know.
And does that influence your thought process on whether or not it should be outlawed or not?
No, because I think people should be free to do things that
But if there's
are not in their best interest, if they want to.
If there's no health benefit, I'm sorry I didn't let you. I didn't let anybody think about it, but like
there's a microeconomic theory, I think that's applicable to the nature or medicine, which is the diminishing marginal utility. So certain beneficial mineral, or I'd say water is the same. Certain beneficial mineral, when you have a little, you get the marginal, each unit that you take is benefits you a lot, benefit the body a lot. And each succeeding unit that you take, the marginal benefit will be smaller and smaller, to a point that if you keep taking it, because it's too much, there's such thing as too much of a good thing, the benefit will be negative. So each more unit you take, it becomes harmful to the extent if you go far enough, it can kill you. So if we extend that theory to ionized radiation, maybe the upward trend, the upward meaning the marginal utility is still positive. Each unit you take is still bring it to a better shape. That upward trend is smaller because of radiation, right? But it's still an upward trend, as opposed to LMT. There's no upward trend. It's just downward, linear, right? Each unit you take is bring you worse off. But because that theory, you have a little upward trend, because of radiation, you're not supposed to take too much. So the upward trend is very small, but very quickly you're going to go downward, and to a point that kill you ultimately. So that's generic. I generalize that concept, as opposed to LNT, linear. It's linear all the way. Mm-hmm. So I think that's at least partially or philosophically answer to your question.
Yeah, that's my understanding is that's a very basic economic concept that you'll pick up in a standard undergraduate microeconomics course. And I remember, I think the example that the professor used was water, right?
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and so he threw out a very basic hypothetical. You're dehydrated, you're walking through the desert, right, and you haven't had water in forever, you're on the verge of dying, and then somehow you get water. Somebody appears out of nowhere and they have a bottle of water, and you're willing to pay anything for that bottle of water.
Right, the trade.
Because at the beginning of you're dehydrated or whatever, the marginal utility for that first bottle of water is like through the roof. Right? You'll never have marginal utility for water higher than you're dehydrated, you're about to die, and you have a bottle of water at hand that you can consume, right? The next one, it'll probably still be a lot because you're dehydrated and everything, but not as much as the first, right? And so on and so on and so on until, like you're saying, eventually the marginal utility goes negative and each additional unit actually is harmful or it has negative utility, right? So yeah, I remember that was the example that they used.
Mm-hmm. And I think the units are called utils.
Utils, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, UTILS,
mm-hmm.
if I'm not mistaken, mm-hmm. which I think is just an abstract. Right. David, can you help me out? Like, util is just an abstract, like, oh, let's pretend we can measure utility and we'll call it utils.
Yeah. I mean, and it's rejected by a lot of people because a lot of people would say that supply and demand curves and all things like that are aspects of human behaviour that involve utility should only be ordinal and not cardinal. So there are some people who argue it's always a fallacy to think that that there are cardinal units that you can measure amounts of utility. All you can say is that this preference is that X is greater than Y.
So, are you finished? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to talk about drugs. Like
nice.
Yeah, and I include alcohol because we're talking about food dyes and stuff, which may kill you when you're in your 90s or something, very, very slowly. But like you can overdose on alcohol, you can overdose on all kinds of like let's say hard drugs, including, I mean, I don't consider marijuana a hard drug. It's definitely not a hard drug. But in my business, small business owner, I'm a drug dealer. I sell alcohol, so that makes me a drug dealer.
How much does a liquor license cost, by the way?
Liquor license, you have to pay the state liquor license, you also have to pay the village, or the municipality. What do we pay right now? It's a couple $100 maybe.
That's not bad.
No, 1,200 is one of them.
Yeah, that's...
For how long? Is that
For a year. Every year. Yeah,
Renew every
1,200
year.
plus another, probably like 2,000 something.
What do they monitor, or what's the criteria to approve the renewal?
You have to, you want to talk about cartels, there's only like, in every region of the state of Illinois, and I have no idea how it is in other states, I'm assuming it's similar, but it's very highly regulated. You can't go to the liquor store down the street to buy a bottle, and I know that because I got fined $500 one time because a bride wanted a particular brand of whatever.
Oh,
and so I went, and somebody ratted us out, one of the managers actually. So anyway, we got fined $500 for having like 2 bottles of whatever liquor because we went to the liquor store and got it. But you have to get it from a handful of like liquor distributor companies, which I consider kind of a cartel, but it's just
Or
the way.
mafia type shit.
No, I mean there's no violence, so I wouldn't consider it a mafia. It's very highly regulated. I'm okay with it because it's controlled.
Well, no, they just outsource their violence to the police. That's what that means. You know, if you get fined and then you don't pay it, you know, it's...
Yeah, but who's like, what police are beating people up for being drunk or something?
No. It's the whole escalation ladder of... Stefan Molyneux called it comply or die, because eventually failure to comply will result in your death.
Okay, so the whole reason I'm bringing up drugs is like with food dyes and all that, COVID vaccines. COVID vaccine was optional, whatever.
That's debatable.
Okay, let's not get into that. But with hard drugs, I assume everybody here agrees that all of it should be decriminalized. So there's a problem with fentanyl. I mean, supposedly that's the whole reason quote-unquote illegals are a problem is because of fentanyl. So, like, how do you figure out the fentanyl problem? You think corporations, if they start producing drugs, are just going to, like, give you the best sort of drug? They're going to be testing it and making sure it's... I mean, by definition, many of these hard drugs are highly addictive. So are they going to be, like, worried about somebody overdosing or something? Or does that cross the line for you, David, where, let's say, a corporation knowingly sells people a highly addictive drug that's highly dangerous, and then a bunch of people, there's an epidemic of overdoses, people are dying. Does that cross the line for, like, getting the government involved in manslaughter or something?
I'm in favour of allowing that. I mean, as long as there is no fraud, as long as...
So they're going to be marketing it as, they're going to be downplaying the negative effects. They're not going to be saying you're going to overdose. There's not going to be a Surgeon General's warning.
Why wouldn't there be?
Well, there wouldn't be a Surgeon General.
Yeah, there wouldn't be a Surgeon General. Yeah, there wouldn't be no government entity forcing them to put explicit lyrics on the album or whatever, or smoking causes cancer, nicotine, whatever. There's going to be nothing like that. So people are going to be dying. People are dying now. Like, will there be any recourse for people to, or is it going to be like all litigious? Like, okay, my son died. His brain wasn't fully formed yet. He legally took this drug because he was 21. Now, what, everybody's just going to be suing everybody because their kid died?
So what's the...
The question is, what, like, if... I'm using hard drugs as an example to test this idea that we don't need government. I mean, in Portugal, they did this 25 years ago, I think. 2001, I think they decriminalized all drugs, and you know, there's kind of mixed results, but
basically they treat it as a
Public health issue.
issue. And it's kind of like an in-between where, yeah, if you want to do heroin, go ahead, but, you know, just do it in a safe way or something. I don't know, I don't remember all the details, but they allow it. And you have to get treatment, I think, if you do. But there's kind of like a quasi space for these types of like harmful, quote unquote, harmful substances. So, and for me, that seems to be the best way forward. And I don't know what you guys
So
think.
like a sort of, like, for lack of a better term, like a controlled legalization? Or a calibrated legalization or something?
Kind of like how alcohol is. Like I said, it's highly regulated. You know, it's different because it's, you know, you can put it in bottles and stuff. It's controlled more easily. And I think that's the best way forward because it is used as a lever. I mean, you guys know 1970, the drug war started by Nixon. And he said, his right-hand man, Ehrlichman, I think, said in an interview in like the 90s, he said, yeah, in 1970 we knew we couldn't just start arresting hippies and black people, so we criminalized marijuana because we knew those communities liked to use marijuana, and that's the way we would just round them up and throw them in jail because they were using marijuana. And that's how the drug war started 55 years ago. And before that it was
That
kind
was
of...
only criminalized then?
It was highly frowned upon, like in the 40s, 50s, like with reefer madness.
Reefer madness.
Yeah, reefer madness and all that stuff. It was considered, but Nixon like really put the pedal to the metal and passed, I forget exactly what he did, but he started the drug war for the reason of just like, there's a bunch of people we don't like politically or for whatever reason, we're just going to arrest them because they're using weed. It's a lever for the government to use.
I mean, I kind of like that idea.
You like the idea of...
You know, some people, you know, just...
You're being facetious.
The hippies and black
I mean,
people.
you know, there's some people you don't
No, you're
like. Just, you know, arrest them for their weed. You know, like, what's the problem?
That's fair. I was trolling you earlier with RFK, so that's fair. I hope you're trolling.
I am, you know.
But, I mean, drugs are kind of an easy... Like red dye number 5, I don't know, like if it's harmful or not, like you were saying. I have no idea. I don't think anybody knows how harmful it is, but heroin, alcohol, you're going to die if you take too much of it. You could die in an hour drinking too much alcohol.
Right, but there are lots of people who drink alcohol all the time and they don't die.
Right, but there's a lot of people that do, whether it's overdosing or crashing into somebody. And I think the regulations for alcohol are just right where they are. Well, maybe not, but anyway.
But is there a benefit to these artificial food dyes? Is there any health benefit?
I have not, I don't know.
I don't know.
Because I asked somebody in a bakery, I asked him if his red velvet brownies were naturally colored or how he colored them. And he had to go back and look. He brought it in his bottle and it said red 40. You know, and so then I asked him if there's a natural way for him to do it. So he was going to look into that. But that's my question. Is there a health benefit to these dyes? And
why do you want to know the answer to that question?
Because, like,
we're not going to be able to answer it
Going to
here.
ban it, we should know if
Each
there
dye
are
is different. You have to
saying
be
if there's
specific.
no benefit,
There's no one answer for all dyes.
if there's no benefit, we can't depend upon the corporations to do what's best for us.
But there may be an
problem there.
aesthetic
There's a
benefit.
problem there.
There may be an aesthetic.
Yeah, I mean, the benefit is it looks pretty when you can take a picture of it.
That's a
post on
benefit.
Instagram,
That would
and I
be
eat it, I feel good.
I
That
love
would be
eating
a-
Blue Jolly Ranchers.
That would be a corporate thing. That's
Yeah,
a
we can
corporate
agree.
lens thing, you know, like, it looks good so we can sell it more, we can sell more of it, but like, that's a corporate thing, but that's not our
It's an individual consumer thing.
Our well-being is
They're
not
prepared to buy it because it looks good and they don't care about the health benefit or disbenefit. I mean, what's the problem here? You just let people choose, and it's up to them to decide what criteria they're going to apply.
But the corporates are going to give us the choice.
Okay.
because they're not doing it. They're not.
What do you mean? Like for example, if a staple in your diet is like, you know, Fruity Pebbles and Fruit Loops, right? Where you get like probably 15 different dyes and stuff in there. Like, you know, my understanding is I think Canada doesn't have cereal that has that kind of stuff. Whoa.
Nice save. Maybe we should
It's the lamp.
Move the lamp. The
It's
lamp
the
is
lamp.
optimized for the lighting, not for the walking.
There needs to be a regulation.
Oh yeah, perfect.
There needs to be a regulation for light placement.
The government needs to require like a motion sensor to oscillate it.
Where's JP?
Yeah. He is. There's a reason why Second City
No,
Cop.
I mean, what they should do is they should just execute people over 80, because then they won't have this problem of people being unsteady on their feet.
Oh, I didn't even see the old stuff.
I mean, why mess about, you know?
You know, there was a.
Just,
But as far as companies giving choice, I'm sure that there are any number of health food things that have their substitute for Fruity Pebbles.
Yeah.
You know.
Or you don't have to eat Fruity Pebbles.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
They
Like.
would have their granola thing or something or whatever.
The difficult thing is that everybody's different. The human body is still, in some ways, a mystery. So, some people could smoke every day and live to be 110 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Jobs was famously like vegan or whatever, or for health reasons, and he died at 55 or whatever. So.
Hey man, that's
He
God
refused
telling. That's
to
God
use
telling.
medical treatment that would have saved him.
Look, that's God telling men not to be wusses and to eat dead animals. That's what that is.
What I'm getting at is that corporations should be looking at everything they put in their food, and they should be like, if it's not good for people in general, then we don't put it in there. So
Okay, but some are not going to do that. Some are just going to be like, hey, it looks like this thing sells. It looks like people want it. We've not vouched for it being healthy or unhealthy in any way. You know, like, you know.
You know, when you say something is harmful, that's conceptually maybe harmful, but if you want to make it a regulation, you have to scientifically prove that it's not, and that it's harmful, which is not always doable. You have to invest money. You have to have the will to do it, and financial interest to do it.
That's
right?
why
It's not always. We're talking about thousands, if not tens of thousands, of things to test.
that's why I went about it, and I said, I didn't say it harmful. I said if there's any benefit, and if there's no benefit, then don't even have it in there.
But,
Same
but
way, yeah,
what people are
benefit.
entitled to do things that don't benefit them. I mean, if people are entitled to eat red dyed things because they just like the color and they
See, we're running into some deeper, moral, ethical, philosophical problems here, because you know when you use the word benefit, I know what you mean. You're meaning a specific kind of benefit that we would call a health benefit.
Yes.
Right? So if there's something that a corporation is putting in and it doesn't have a health benefit, then why are they even putting it in there? Well, because there may be non-health benefits to them doing it, right? The benefit might be it makes it look pretty, right? It might be, well, hold on, let me finish. It might be that it looks pretty. It might be, and maybe that's the kind of benefit, like maybe the parents of a child, you know, they like seeing their child happy when they see all the different colors in their cereal bowl, like, you know, you shouldn't be having cereal like that, but whatever, you know, the different colors is a aesthetic benefit, right? So now what you're posing is, I think that health benefits should outride aesthetic benefits. I'm just using aesthetic benefit as an example.
Bodies, you know, for our own nutrition.
Right, but
It's
you're
common sense.
imposing. But the problem is, you're imposing your value judgment that everybody should always value health benefits over other non-health benefits, right? And that kind of fundamental value difference is where you get major issues and conflict, because maybe I'm someone who, you know, maybe I'm reasonably okay about health benefits, but I'm a little looser about it, and I'm willing to accept, you know, health, what's the opposite of benefit? Health harms or health costs in the pursuit of some other benefit that I derived pleasure or enjoyment from, right? And so now when you're in the habit of you can only maximize your utility, let's pretend we're utilitarians for a moment, you can only maximize your utility by maximizing your health benefits, and you know, you're not allowed to maybe sacrifice some health benefit in order to, you know, increase some other non-health benefit. Now we have a problem, because now it's like, well, who are you to decide how people satisfy their wants and desires, right? You know, economics is just, you know, how does Thomas Sowell say it, and maybe countless other people, you know, economics is essentially, you know, people have infinite wants for finite goods, right? And so how do you, you know, and so how, you know, you're now judging what people's wants should be. And that just seems like a total overreach of any kind of authority, power, or it's arrogant, quite frankly, is what I would say.
What about the fact that different, these problems are different for different people? Some people are affected differently by, who knows, red dye or other poisons that go into food.
Allergies.
And some people are not affected by it.
Yeah, that too.
So why should I have to not be able to eat something that doesn't bother me, but it does bother a bunch of other people?
It's way too complicated to, it's not feasible to figure it out.
But that happens all the time, that people have something that seems so apparent to them, so clear to them that this is the way it should be, this is the moral position, this is the correct position, and don't see that other viewpoint, don't see,
That's one of the.
They want to impose that on everybody else.
That's one of the cool things about.
They just see it as common sense.
Ernie, why do you want to be eating Red 40?
Huh?
Why do you want to be eating Red 40?
Because Red 39 sucks.
Wanting to eat Red 40. I don't care about Red 40. As long as the food that I eat doesn't poison me immediately, I'm probably fairly happy. You know?
So
but,
what do you?
Yeah, go ahead.
What do you think of RFK? RFK, David answered. I don't know if anybody. Did you answer about RFK Jr.?
I didn't, but I'll throw a few thoughts in there.
Like that's what I'm curious about. From
in the grand scheme of government overreach, I'm not going to complain too loudly about RFK with Red 40. I'm just not. Like, is it technically like not libertarian? Like, yeah, but I don't care that much in the grand scheme of things. I really don't. If it's one of those things where, like, yeah, don't get in the habit of using government power in a way to abridge people's liberties to, you know, eat or consume whatever they want, but let's pretend that doing this actually yielded, like, long-term health benefits for children as they, you know, didn't consume a whole bunch of artificial shit. Like, you know what, I might raise an academic objection, but I'm not gonna get my knickers in a twist, as, you know, might be said in some areas of the globe.
What do you think about RFK's efforts in this area?
Yeah, I think it's an infringement on individual rights.
I mean, I agree, I just don't care.
Having anybody in that position at all is telling people how to behave and what to do.
I got a question. Okay, so we're talking about rights. Is anybody going to fight? Like, is that when people get their rights taken away, oftentimes it leads to fighting, you know, like some sort of a fight.
Is it about a physical fight or a...
Who knows? It could be anything, you know. Yeah. Is anybody going to fight if people can't be allowed to eat Red 40 anymore in their food? Is anybody going to be, like, fighting? Like, is there going to be, like, unrest in our cities because now people can't be eating Red 40?
Well, when it comes to drugs, there are gangs that kill. The drug cartels in Mexico are responsible for, and a lot of that is fueled by the drug war, or the fact that drugs are criminalized, and so they fight for
more expensive and more profitable.
Yeah, and they fight for turf, and they fight for.
But is anybody going to fight because they can't be having artificial food colors in their food anymore?
Probably
I
not.
don't think,
Probably
yeah, I
probably
don't
not.
think
If
so.
you try and ban booze.
What are you getting at?
Is the price
He argued as,
Yeah,
you know,
prohibition.
people
in,
different.
in general, is the price of artificial food coloring gonna skyrocket because now all of a sudden it's illegal?
No, it's not addictive.
But my point is, it's different. Like it's
I
a right
guess-
to eat what you want, but on the other hand, like nobody's gonna fight because it's not like there's no benefit. Like nobody wants it
I
really.
don't think
Like who wants it really? Who wants it?
consumers,
Who really
except-
wants it?
Yeah,
You said that some people want it aesthetically, but really who wants it? Probably
Well,
not that many people.
The people who buy it are the
People,
people
the
who want it.
companies don't wanna
Something
take
red.
it out because they know it sells. They
the
know
people,
that the bright colors sell.
the people that are buying it don't want it. The
I don't know
people
what I want.
that are buying it buy it because it's there. Like they don't want it, they're just buying it because it comes with the cereal.
I need the
I
corporations
don't
to
know
tell
that
me.
that's even coherent, like, you know, arguably by, you know, unless there literally is a physical dependence or psychological dependence, you know, or addiction. Wait. If you're buying it, by definition you want it. Because
Nobody's
you
looking
sacrifice something in order to get it.
Nobody's looking at the boxes and being like, there's artificial colors in here, I'm gonna buy that.
I think some people do look at the boxes.
How do you,
But the
how do
thing
you,
is,
how do you know
that
this?
these
How do you know
companies
this?
know that the bright colors from
Right.
these dangerous, supposedly dangerous dyes do sell. If one brand gets rid of them,
Okay.
sales go down.
Uh-huh. Okay, all right, yes, I
So,
think you're
so
right.
it becomes more expensive for the corporations, so they either have to have substitution, you know, come up with something else, or, you know, do their lobbying, arm twisting stuff with the government, you know.
So in your
Or
world,
they all have to agree that none of us will use, but it's very hard to get a lot of individuals and companies to agree.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that we'll all take the red dye out, and then nobody benefits or loses from the marketing value. That's the only
Or it
value
becomes
that
a
it has,
benefit
marketing.
because of the marketing of it, or the what's out there in the media about it. It becomes an advantage to one company over another company, saying, "Oh, we're natural. We're, you know, maybe we look a little duller, but we're natural, and
Well,
this is
sure,
good,
yeah.
and we're healthy for you." You know, it's
Like organic food.
yeah.
What kind of studies have been done on the health benefits of organic food versus non-organic food to the consumer? From the nutritional point of view.
Yeah, who knows?
Are there any benefits?
Yeah.
It's very hard to do.
Huh?
That kind of test is very hard to do.
Yeah, I would
When
think
you do a test, there are always the critiques and
yeah.
controversies.
yeah, the
so.
term all natural means absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Like, legally, it means nothing, that you can just put
Yeah,
all
you
natural
can
in it.
game the terminology and, you know, yeah, I know what you mean.
And
I
it
just
just,
love the things, the packages that say like, you know, lactose-free, gluten-free, and it's like something that would never have that in anyway.
And then you
know?
open it up and all there is air in there because it's free of everything.
inflation.
You know, it's like a type of food that you couldn't have gluten in it, you know.
Mhm.
But would these corporations even be putting ingredients on their packaging? If it wasn't
One for
like,
the law.
They didn't
Went
in the
They
past.
didn't. Oh, no, that's
until
only
what?
in the last 20 years.
40 years ago, maybe.
Yeah,
30,
well,
40 years, or whatever.
it's relatively recent. You know.
So
like, okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. So, how do you feel about that? Is it okay like, in a libertarian, 100% libertarian,
utopia.
there'd be nothing there'd be no labeling for our food, and now we're eating like mystery food. How do you guys feel about
That's
that?
not necessarily true that there would be no labeling in the food.
right.
You might have different food companies or whatever that will advertise, you know, like, hey, they might brand themselves as, you know, the honest food company, you know, who knows? They might brand themselves as the honest food company and, you know, we're fully transparent in all our ingredients, you know, and then they'll say, you know, here's a comprehensive list of all our ingredients in what I think is the typical order, that the first is the most prominent and then it just goes on in descending order of quantity or mass or whatever it is. You know, and then once you do that, then you kick in the, you know, fundamental libertarian thing about like, well, we can nail you for fraud if you're lying about it, right? If you lie about your ingredients, if you lie about the nutritional content or whatever, then you know you can get nailed for fraud. What?
Criminally or civilly?
Criminally.
Okay.
It should be criminal. Like if you
Just clarifying.
Yeah, I think it should be criminal. You do that shit, you go to jail.
Because there's probably some libertarians that would say just sue them.
Nah, I think you should go to jail for that. Hey, I don't know what the standard libertarian position on civil versus criminal, but my gut tells me put them in jail. Don't lie to people about your products. You do that, you go to jail. How severe the sentence should be, you can debate that all day long. I don't really care, but there should be some jail sentence where it stings so that people will be disincentivized to do it. If, for example, 5 months doesn't sting hard enough, then maybe make it a year.
So what about lies of omission where you have no ingredients?
But see, that's a competitive thing, because people would not trust that. And so they wouldn't buy that product compared to somebody that it would be a competitive